Chapter 1081. She was petite, and it was already difficult for her to carry Yifeng, let alone carry him. After a few steps, she fell heavily to the ground. Ning Xiuma hurriedly helped Yan Ziyuan up. Her knee was already bruised and bleeding, but she didn't seem to feel it. She continued to carry Yifeng and limped out. Ning Xiuma couldn't help but say, "Ziyuan, put Yifeng on Little Apple." Yan Ziyuan didn't say anything. She just hugged Yifeng even tighter, as if she was hugging the most important treasure in her life. It was as if she was afraid that someone would take it away from her. They continued to stumble forward. Ning Xiuma and Shun Juli followed behind them. Kiran also followed with drooping ears. In the narrow cave, only Gu Zian was left with his acupoints sealed. He had been left behind. No, he didn't want to be left here. He would die here. Gu Zian tried his best to attack the acupoints that Ning Xiuma had casually sealed. He didn't know if it was a coincidence or something else, but the acupoints were unsealed. He was overjoyed and immediately stumbled out. When he finally saw Ning Xiuma and the others, he didn't dare to shout. He just followed them from a distance. Shun Juli seemed to have sensed something. He pursed his lips slightly. Without turning his head, he waved his hand. Gu Zian's eyes were wide open, and he was completely frozen in place. He was terrified for a moment, but he couldn't shout anymore. He could only watch as the group walked further and further away. After some time, Ning Xiuma and the others finally walked out of the cave and saw the blue sky again. The exit of the cave was an ice cliff. Below the ice cliff was the surging sea. Yan Ziyuan was still holding Yifeng. Her expression was blank as she walked forward. If Ning Xiuma hadn't caught her in time, she would have fallen off the cliff. Yan Ziyuan finally regained her senses. Looking at the undulating waves of the sea below, she slowly revealed a smile and softly said, "Big brother Yifeng, look, the sea." She hugged Yifeng and slowly sat down facing the sea. "Brother Yifeng, you actually want to return to the sea the most, right? Once our shark men leave the water, their bodies will feel very uncomfortable. You have always wanted to go back, right? You're just worried about me, right?" She lowered her eyes and smiled to herself. "Big brother Yifeng, you did everything for me, but I didn't do anything for you. I only know how to be willful in front of you, but I didn't do anything for you. Big brother Yifeng, what do you want me to do the most? Let me do it for you, okay?" Yifeng naturally wouldn't answer her. She hugged Yifeng tightly again. "Big brother Yifeng, tell me." Kiran couldn't help but say, "Yifeng wanted you to eat the fish he roasted for you, but you didn't want to eat it. Now you can't eat it even if you want to." Yan Ziyuan's body stiffened. She lowered her head to look at Yifeng in her arms. She seemed to recall the scene when they first arrived. Yifeng really did want to roast fish for her, but she would rather eat that scum's fish than have a taste. Her lips trembled slightly as she pressed her face against Yifeng's cold face. "Big brother Yifeng, I'm sorry." Her tears dripped onto Yifeng's face, but she couldn't call him back no matter what. Ning Xiuma's chest also felt very stuffy. She didn't say anything else. Yan Ziyuan's sadness was too strong. Letting her cry here was better than keeping it bottled up in her heart. After a while, Yan Ziyuan slowly raised her head and looked at Ning Xiuma. "Xiuma, can you ask Kiran to help me catch another ice crystal fish?" Chapter 1082. Ning Xiuma nodded and turned to order Kiran, "Little Apple, go down and catch an ice crystal fish." The little Qilin nodded its big head. "It's not a big deal. Leave it to me. Don't even mention one. Even if it's a basket full of them, I can still catch them." It leaped up, and with a splash, it created a big splash of water. Yan Ziyuan hugged Yifeng and looked at the sea with eyes full of longing and reminiscence. There were white birds circling the sea in the distance. The starry sky was bright, the moon was cold, the sea breeze was whistling, and the waves were rolling. There seemed to be a faint song from afar, full of sadness. Ning Xiuma stood beside her and wanted to say something, but in the end, she remained silent. At this time, no matter what she said, Yan Ziyuan would not listen. She was completely immersed in her own world. Yifeng's death was a fatal blow to her. It was hard to imagine how she would live in the future. Even if she went back, she would no longer be the innocent Yin Ziyuan. She would be the mermaid Yi Yu who carried the memories of two lives. The little Qilin quickly popped its head out and flew up like a wisp of smoke. It shook violently, and after its scales were once again refreshed, it ran over as if it was asking for credit. Master, master, look, I caught 3 ice crystal fish. Ning Shuima patted Little Apple's big head to encourage it. Little Apple enjoyed it and rubbed its head against her palm. Before it was satisfied, it heard Shun Julie say lightly, "Go down and catch your own food." Little Apple felt its body suddenly fly into the air, and its whole beast flew out directly. It plunged into the sea like a cannonball. It pulled its head out of the mud for a long time. After it came out, it did not dare to fly up. It opened its mouth and angrily swallowed a big fish that passed by. Yin Ziyuan clumsily handled one of the ice crystal fish. She scraped the scales and removed the internal organs. She was busy for a long time before she finished all these work. In the past, he had seen Yifeng doing it with ease, but now that he was doing it himself, he realized how difficult it was. If he wasn't careful, he would be scraped by the scales. It turned out that big brother Yifeng had done so much for her. It was a pity that she didn't cherish him. Now that he had completely left, it was too late for regrets. Yin Ziyuan closed her eyes. Her tears had already dried up, but the deep sorrow in her heart was like a mass of thick ink that couldn't be dissolved, slowly spreading. The pain was so heavy that she couldn't breathe. In the end, she set up a fire and skewered the fish that was almost processed on a branch. Yin Ziyuan slowly put Yifeng down and let him sit up straight. She snuggled up behind him and hugged Yifeng. She placed the branch with the fish in it into Yifeng's hand. Yifeng's hand was clenched tightly. There seemed to be something in it. Yin Ziyuan silently pried his hands off one by one. It was a piece of the little mermaid crystal. She held her breath. The pain in her heart attacked her fiercely. She held the crystal so tightly that her whole body was trembling. Big brother Yifeng, the crystal that she casually picked up and gave to him, was treated like a treasure by him. He always carried it with him. Even when he died, he held it in his hand. His body was full of holes, but this fragile crystal remained intact. It shone with a strange luster under the moonlight. When she was carving Gu Zian's crystal, Yifeng asked her to carve it for him. What did she say at that time? Yes, she asked him to wait. She even slapped him. She didn't expect that after waiting, they would be separated by life and death. Chapter 1083. Yin Ziyuan's heart ached so much that she wanted to dig it out directly. She curled up tightly beside Yifeng. Brother Yifeng, Brother Yifeng, please forgive me, forgive Ayu. Ayu knows she was wrong. Her voice seemed to resonate with the sobbing of the sea at this moment. It was sad and sorrowful, making those who heard it sad and those who heard it cry. Yifeng's body was suddenly swayed by her and was about to fall to the ground. Yin Ziyuan was so scared that she rushed over and lay down before his body fell to the ground. Yifeng fiercely smashed on her body. She only let out a muffled groan and gently brushed away the snow on Yifeng's body. She slowly helped him up with a head full of cold sweat. She asked softly, "Brother Yifeng, did you fall anywhere? Does it hurt? It's all Ayu's fault. Ayu shouldn't have fooled around when Brother Yifeng was roasting fish. Brother Yifeng spoils Ayu too much. You should teach Ayu a lesson at this time." Ning Xunhua stood at the side and felt a dull pain in her heart. Yin Ziyuan's mind was obviously not normal again. There was a burnt smell in the air, as if something was being roasted. Ning Xunhua saw that the fish had been roasted. She was so distracted that she forgot about the fish for a moment. Yin Ziyuan was also stunned. She stared blankly at the ice crystal fish that was being roasted black in the fire. Suddenly, she rushed forward and reached out to grab the fish. Ning Xunhua quickly stopped her. Yin Ziyuan was still struggling desperately and kept reaching out to grab the fish. Looking at her, Ning Xuma's heart suddenly burned with evil fire. She scolded her. "Yin Ziyuan, are you crazy? That's spiritual fire. If you put your hand in, your whole arm will be crippled. Do you understand? Yifeng risked his life to save you. How can you bear to ruin yourself like this?" Yin Ziyuan was stunned by her scolding. After a while, she slowly lowered her head. But that's the fish that brother Yi Feng roasted for me. I can't spoil his good intentions. Ning Xiuma was both distressed and angry. Are you going to ruin yourself like this? Can't you roast another one? Yin Ziyuan suddenly shrank back like an injured hedgehog. Her whole body was trembling. Xiuma, don't say any more. I beg you, don't say any more. This fish can't be wasted. Woo, this is the first fish that brother Yifeng has roasted for me in this lifetime. Ning Xiuma closed her eyes and sighed. She extinguished the spiritual fire and waved her hand. The burnt fish flew into Yin Ziyuan's hand. Yin Ziyuan was stunned. Then she smiled happily and lowered her head to eat the fish. The fish was burnt black and gave off an unpleasant burnt smell. There wasn't any seasoning on it, but Yin Ziyuan ate it seriously as if she had found a treasure. As she ate, tears streamed down her face. Her usually sweet voice became slightly hoarse. She seemed to be holding back her surging emotions. She raised her eyes and smiled at Yifeng. It's delicious. It's delicious. Brother Yifeng, you really likes the fish you roasted? Yifeng still looked the same. His eyes were slightly closed, as if he had fallen asleep. Yin Ziyuan held him in her arms and said softly, Brother Yifeng, you is greedy. I want to eat another one. Brother Yifeng, can you roast another fish for Ayu? She started to prepare the second fish. While roasting, she held Yifeng's hand and smiled sweetly. She was like a young girl in love, but her eyes were empty. Chapter 1084. She began to prepare the second fish. While roasting it, she held Yifeng's hand and smiled sweetly, like a girl in love, but her eyes were empty, like a doll that only knew how to smile. Yin Ziyuan once again lowered her head to eat the fish. In fact, she was already full after eating the first fish, but she still ate the second one with a numb expression. She praised while tears streamed down her face. After eating the fish, Yin Ziyuan began to carve the little mermaid crystal with a knife. Under the moonlight, Ning Xiuma watched the crystal gradually become clear. In the end, Yin Ziyuan wasn't good at carving, so she accidentally cut herself several times. In the end, when she finished carving the crystal, her hands were also full of scars. The crystal soaked in her blood looked exceptionally beautiful, sparkling and translucent, sparkling under the moonlight. Yin Ziyuan happily picked up the crystal and waved it in front of Yifeng. Brother Yifeng, look, isn't it beautiful? Doesn't it look like you? Brother Yifeng, as long as you say you want it, you will give it to you immediately. Her voice was lively and sweet, even with a hint of playfulness. Ning Xiuma felt like there was a big stone in her heart. It was so heavy that she had nowhere to put it. Brother Yifeng, I'm just joking with you. Even if you don't say anything, Ayu will definitely give it to you. Everything that Ayu has is yours. Yin Ziyuan's voice was still playful, but her expression was full of pain. Brother Yifeng, can you talk to you? Even if it's just a sentence. She slowly squatted down. Her heart hurt so much that she wanted to take it out. Yin Ziyuan closed her eyes and slowly waited for the hysterical pain to pass. A gust of wind blew, bringing with it the smell of the salty sea. She supported Yifeng and slowly got up. Everywhere she looked was a sea of blue. There seemed to be a soft sound in the air. Big brother Yifeng, you love the sea the most, right? At this moment, you must also want to return to the sea. Yin Ziyuan's voice was filled with tenderness, as if she was a wife who was about to send her lover off. You came here clean, so you must want to go home clean, right? I will help you. Yin Ziyuan scooped up a handful of snow and carefully cleaned the wounds on Yifeng's body. She cleaned very carefully and very slowly, not letting go of any wounds. After a while, her small hands were frozen red and gradually lost feeling. After an unknown amount of time, Yifeng's wound was finally cleaned by her. Yin Ziyuan hugged Yifeng and gradually closed her eyes. She stood on tiptoe and kissed Yifeng's cold lips. This kiss was full of longing, crossing the distance between life and death, crossing the boundary of the river of stars, quietly lingering in this place. At the end of the kiss, Yin Ziyuan's cheeks were slightly red. Her watery eyes seemed to be filled with a sky full of stars, astonishingly bright. She looked at Yifeng affectionately, her eyes full of tenderness, and her lips gradually curved into a smile. She smiled charmingly and innocently, as if an innocent girl who did not know the affairs of the world had finally waited for her true love. She was also like that day under the blue sea, in the dazzling crystal forest, in front of thousands of sharkmen. Little Princess Yi's beautiful eyes that could turn all living things upside down. Ning Xiuma suddenly had a bad premonition. The strong uneasiness made her want to rush up and grab Yan Ziyuan, but it was already too late. Yan Ziyuan hugged Yifeng and jumped down. The only thing that could be heard in the wind was a sentence that was like a whisper. "Big brother Yifeng, let's go home." Chapter 1085. Ning Xiuma did not expect that this trip to the ice field would end up like this. When they arrived, there were 5 of them, but when they returned, only she and the Almighty were left. The sky was filled with red clouds, and her heart was as heavy as the clouds in the sky. If I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have interfered in this matter. This way, Ziyuan wouldn't have died, and Yifeng wouldn't have died. I actually wanted them to be well, but I didn't expect. Ning Xiuma had always been straightforward and confident, but now she felt helpless and uncertain. Could it be that it's really because I'm a jinx? No matter who I meddle in, no one will have a good ending. Shun Juli raised his hand and held her in his arms. He said lightly, "This ending is the best for them." According to the original fate, Yan Ziyuan and Gu Ziyan would have been married for 10 years. Gu Ziyan would have taken in another concubine, doting on that concubine and completely ignoring her and Rong Yan. He demoted her to a concubine. She was depressed and died of a serious illness. When Yifeng heard about her death, he would have come to avenge her. He fell into Gu Ziyan's trap and was captured. He was given a Lu Hin tea as a treasure. Lu Hin tea skinned him to make clothes, and his soul was scattered. Ning Xiuma was speechless. She did not expect Yifeng and Rong Yan's fate to be so cruel. She sighed slightly. Although their fate was cruel, they still had 10 more years to live. At the very least, Ziyuan will have a good life for a while. Half a year after Yan Ziyuan's marriage, the twin curse was broken. She regretted it, but what was done, and there was nothing she could do. She was always cold to Gu Ziyan. Gu Ziyan was angry, and he only cared about Rong Yan. A year later, Lord Yin died suddenly. Gu Ziyan inherited the position of Lord of Daliang City and made Rong Yin his second wife. Yan Ziyuan was only Gu Ziyan's legal wife in name. Her food and clothing expenses were often deducted by Rong Yan. She was depressed all her life and didn't even get to see Yifeng before she died. The Almighty explained Yan Ziyuan's unaltered fate in more detail. Ning Xiuma, from the looks of it, this ending was still better. She pursed her lips. I thought I could change their fates and let them finally obtain happiness. These two people clearly loved each other, but due to a freak combination of factors, they ended up like this. Yifeng loved her so much, but until the moment of his death, he didn't know that Yan Ziyuan loved him. And Yan Ziyuan couldn't tell him anymore. Going against the heavens and changing one's fate doesn't mean that you can change it to the outcome you want. Instead, you can force one's fate into an unknown passageway. As for whether it will be sad or happy, it all depends on the actions of the two people whose fates have been changed. Back then, Yifeng gambled on his fate with Yan Ziyuan. They were not meant to be in this lifetime, but Yan Ziyuan broke the curse when she jumped into the sea with Yifeng in her arms. She and Yifeng will be fated to be in this lifetime. If they know how to seize the opportunity, it's possible that this lifetime's fate will become eternal. You mean they will come back to life? Ning Xiuma's eyes lit up slightly. Shun Juli rubbed his chin on the top of her head and gave her an unfathomable answer. Heaven's secrets are not to be revealed. Ning Xiuma. The Almighty was keeping her in suspense again. At this moment, Kiran had already carried them on their return journey. They flew over the deep blue sea under the ice field again. Shun Juli glanced down at the waves. When Yan Ziyuan jumped into the sea with Yifeng in her arms, Ning Xiuma subconsciously wanted to jump as well. However, He pulled her back and kicked the stunned Kirin into the sea. Chapter 1086. After Kirin jumped down, it discovered that there was a huge whirlpool at the bottom of the sea that no one dared to approach. It watched as Yin Ziyuan and Yi Feng were sucked into the whirlpool. Kirin was inexperienced and did not recognize the huge whirlpool that appeared out of nowhere. However, Shunjili knew. Ultimate ruin. That was the source of the sea. Ultimate ruin. The sinkhole was also the source of life for all marine creatures. If there were no accidents, the two of them would be reborn in ultimate ruin. After all, Yin Ziyuan was forced to reincarnate as a human by the Sea Ray Sorcerer's curse. When the curse was broken, she would regain her identity as the Sea Race's Sharkmen, and Yi Feng would still be the Sharkmen. If their obsession with each other was deep enough, their memories of this life would not disappear. Yi Feng would still be Yi Feng, and Yin Ziyuan would still be the Yin Ziyuan with Yi Yu's memories. However, Yi Feng's fate was changed by Shunjili. It was a true heavenly secret. If it was revealed, not only would he be punished by the heavens, the fate of the two of them would change again. Thus, he could not tell Ning Xiuma. In any case, Ning Xiuma only hoped for her good friends to be well. As long as they were happy, everything else was not important. The two of them naturally returned to Buddha Lotus Mountain, and Ning Xiuma met the other disciples of the Sun Moon sect. Ning Xiuma's rapid growth made everyone's jaws drop. They simply did not dare to believe it, especially Hellion Xiao, who circled around her 3 times and only had one word left in his mouth. Miracle! Miracle! When Ning Xiuma had just entered the ancestors' tutelage, she was still an Earth rank level 2 rookie. In just a short period of 10 days, she had actually advanced to Earth rank level 5 and was about to enter level 6. Not long after Ning Xiuma returned to the Buddha Lotus Mountain, the day of Ji Yinhuang and Tian Shueching's wedding arrived. Lu Henti sent someone to deliver an invitation. When Ning Xiuma saw the invitation, she said indifferently, "I'm not going. Send my blessings to His Highness the Crown Prince and Crown Princess on my behalf. I wish that they can grow old in harmony and love each other until their hair turns white." Then he sent the envoy away. "Didn't you agree to attend Ji Yunhuang's wedding?" Shunjili asked as he sipped his tea. After returning to Mount Buddha Lotus, Shunjili gave her a few days off so that she could relax. Finally, she became more lively. He thought that she would definitely attend Ji Yunhuang's wedding, but he did not expect that she would choose not to attend. Ning Xiuma was depressed. She sat on a chair and swayed. Maybe if I don't go, the result will be better. It seemed like the tragedy of Yin Ziyuan and Yi Feng had traumatized her. Shunjili was speechless. He pulled her up. "Come with me." Ning Xiuma stumbled and fell into his arms. She rubbed her eyebrows and looked up. "Where are we going?" "Chongkong country." Shunjili spat out these 3 words and took her away. "I'm still a heavenly master there. The Crown Prince's wedding still needs a heavenly master." Ning Xiuma was speechless. She had forgotten that the great master was Han Shanhua. She was still unwilling to go. She broke free from his hand. "Great master, you can go by yourself. I don't need to go." She turned around and was about to return to her side chamber. "I'm going to rest." She did not know why, but she was a little sleepy recently. It was probably because she was too tired from running around for the past few days. Shunjili scooped her up in his arms and leaped into the air. "I've told you before that you can't leave my sight at all times. So wherever I go, you can only follow." Chapter 1087. Ning Xiuma felt a bit of a headache. Ever since the great god accepted her as his disciple and said that he would train her day and night, she and the great god had never been separated. They were like conjoined twins. No matter where she went, she could see the great god's figure. This kind of protection was airtight, but it also made her feel a bit breathless. She helplessly supported her forehead in his arms. "Great God, I really think that I should have some private time. We should maintain a bit of distance occasionally." At this moment, Shunjili was already flying in the sky with her. He put her on a cloud 2 feet away from him and then slightly closed his eyes. "Well, now there's a distance. You can do whatever you want to do." Ning Xuema's lips twitched. Great God, you are strong. Seriously counting the time, Ning Xuema had left Chongkong country for less than half a year. When she stepped into Marquis Jing Yuan's mansion again, she had an illusion that it was a lifetime ago. Everything in Marquis Jing Yuan's mansion was still the same. In the few months that she was not here, Old Zhong took care of Marquis Jing Yuan's mansion in an orderly manner. The servants in the mansion were performing their duties, and it was no different from before she left. When Old Zhong saw her, he was so excited that his eyes were filled with tears. When a master and servant met, it was lively. Ning Xuema was originally worried about them, but when she saw them like this, her heart finally relaxed. She suddenly remembered Tom, the chastity-testing beast, so she asked Old Zhong about it. Old Zhong looked like he wanted to say something, but hesitated. After a long time, he said he went out shopping. He should be back soon. Ning Xuema was flabbergasted. The chastity-testing beast, that kind of monster, went shopping? What if it scared the cats and dogs on the street? Just as she thought about it, a voice sounded from outside. Old Zhong, come back. I have something delicious to eat. I'm hungry. I'm starving to death. That voice was very strange. It sounded like a foreigner speaking Chinese. The tone was very stiff and awkward. Following the voice, a blond youth walked in with big strides. High nose, deep eyes, blonde hair, and blue eyes. He was actually a standard Northern European handsome guy. Ning Xuema's heart moved. Could it be? The handsome Caucasian man suddenly saw Ning Xuema sitting at the head of the table and was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, he shouted and rushed over, Little Xuema. He opened his arms and wanted to give Ning Xuema a bear hug. However, before his arm could touch the corner of Ning Xuema's clothes, he suddenly felt as if a gust of wind had hit him head-on. He staggered back several steps and sat on the ground with a plop. His butt hurt badly from the fall. Fortunately, he was a thick-skinned person. He jumped up from the ground and said, Which bastard, just as he was about to curse, which bastard plotted against me? He suddenly saw Shun Julie sitting at the head of the table. His gaze was as cold as electricity, so he swallowed back the words he was about to say. Ning Xuema had already stood up. She circled around him and called out tentatively, Tom? The golden-haired boy was almost in tears. I am. Xuema, you finally came back. You finally missed your big brother. The golden-haired boy was actually Tom, the chastity-testing beast. Ning Xuema almost couldn't believe it. Tom, did you repossess another body? Tom shook his head like a rattle drum. No, I cultivated into a human form. Ning Xuema didn't expect that it could cultivate into a human form in just a few months. It seemed that this child was also a genius. She looked at Tom again. The boy looked to be 14 or 15 years old. His delicate face was still childish. Is this your face from your previous life? Ning Xuema wasn't sure. Chapter 1088. Yes. Tom's face was full of pride as he struck a pose. How is it? Isn't brother handsome? This sentence was actually very smooth. Ning Xuema snapped her fingers. Cool. She glanced at him again. Your Chinese is also not bad. Although he still spoke with a foreign devil's accent, he could at least communicate with people. Tom had been a chastity-testing beast for thousands of years. His internal psychokinesis had already reached the stage of transformation, but he didn't know how to use it and couldn't communicate with people normally, so he had been sullen until now. Later, the books that Ning Xuema gave him were simply gospel to him. He eagerly read and understood. After a few months of closed-door cultivation, he finally found a method to cultivate into a human form. Half a month ago, he finally cultivated into a human form, which almost scared everyone in the Marquis Jingyuan mansion. Although it was difficult for bees to cultivate into a human form, they could change their appearance as they wished. Therefore, Tom's human form was his appearance from his previous life. After cultivating into a human form, he had always regarded the Marquis Jingyuan mansion as his home. The years of being locked in a cage were his nightmare. Therefore, once he cultivated into a human form, he went out to the streets almost every day to enjoy the joy of freedom. At that time, the only person who could communicate with him and help him cultivate into a human form was Ning Xuema. He naturally missed her very much. Now that he suddenly saw her return, he was so excited that he didn't know what to do. Once he opened his mouth, it was simply like the power of the yellow river from the sky, unceasing. Even if other people wanted to interrupt, they couldn't. Tom spoke with great delight, and Ning Xiuma was also amused by him to smile frequently. Shun Julie sat there drinking tea and didn't intend to interrupt the two people. After returning from the ice field, Ning Xiuma had been somewhat depressed. Now that she rarely showed a happy face, he naturally wouldn't disturb her. Ning Xiuma and Tom's conversation found that he was very business-minded. In the month that he recovered into a human form, he had already solved several economic crises for the marquis Jinyuan mansion, and also drove away several of the Ning mansion's best relatives. While they were talking, a faint noise came from outside. After a while, someone came in to report that third Aunt Ning and second young lady Ning were outside the door asking to see Ning Xiuma, Marquis Ning. Ning Xiuma naturally knew who this so-called third Aunt Ning was. She was the one whose arm was bitten off by the chastity-testing beast. He didn't know where this second young Miss Ning came from. Tom snorted. This second young lady Ning is the daughter of third Aunt Ning. Her psychokinesis has reached human rank level 4. She's the one who's spoiled by the whole family. Ning Xiuma understood. She raised her hand. They got the news fast. Let them in. She wanted to see what kind of trouble they would come up with this time. A moment later, third Aunt Ning and second young lady Ning were let in. When third Aunt Ning saw Ning Xiuma, she was stunned, but then her face showed an affectionate surprise. "Oh, Xiuma, where have you been these days? I missed you so much." Ning Xiuma also smiled. "Thank you for your concern, Aunt Ning. Aunt Ning's arm must be better?" Third Aunt Ning stiffened for a moment, then smiled again. "Much better, much better. It's all thanks to Xiuma's medical skills. Our Ning family has such a talented woman like you. In the future, our Ning family will be prosperous." She then greeted the girl who came in. "Shuiying, this is your little sister Xiuma. You haven't seen each other for 2 or 3 years, right? Get close to each other." Chapter 1089. Ning Shuiying was a 16 or 17-year-old girl. Her features were sharp, and she looked a bit like her mother. Her appearance was above average, and she could barely be considered a beauty if she was properly groomed. However, the arrogance in her features destroyed her beauty. She also greeted Ning Xiuma with a fake smile. "Little sister Xiuma, I haven't seen you in a few years, and you've grown so much." Ning Xiuma had the memories of the original owner. She knew that before Marquis Ning died, Ning Shuiying treated Ning Xiuma quite well. She called her little sister all day long. When Marquis Ning died, she immediately changed her attitude. She scolded Xiuma as trash every day, and she lost the face of the Ning clan. She said such words too often. She used the fact that she was a genius to bully the young Ning Xiuma. She even secretly kicked Ning Xiuma off a cliff once. If Ning Xiuma didn't happen to be hanging on a tree, she would have died at that time. Ning Shuiying had not returned home for 2 years. Although she had heard a lot about Ning Xiuma's deeds in her own sect, she still didn't believe that the once cowardly and lowly Ning Xiuma could create such a big wave. She felt that it was just a rumor. Now that she saw Ning Xiuma, she saw that her features were much prettier and her temperament was very different from before. Especially her clothes. They looked simple, but they were made of shark silk. A small piece of cloth was worth thousands of gold. It was comparable to all of her belongings. This made her feel unbalanced. She turned her head, and her gaze landed on Shun Julie, who had been calmly drinking tea at the side. Her eyes lit up, and she walked forward. "This is Celestial Master Han?" She couldn't see Shun Julie's face clearly. She only felt that he was very handsome and extraordinary. He was 100 times more handsome than all of her senior and junior brothers combined. Ning Shuiying immediately bowed towards Shun Julie. She purposely softened her tone. "Ning Shuiying greets Celestial Master Han." She still had a soft and pleasant voice, which was described by her fellow disciples as the most enchanting voice. It was very good at seducing men. In the sect, She even used this voice to seduce a martial uncle to prostrate himself under her skirt. She thought that this coquettish bow would attract Master Han to look at her a few times and then gently allow her to stand up. But the reality was harsh. Master Han didn't even look at her. He was still leisurely sipping his tea. Ning Shuiying bowed there for a long time until her waist was sore, but she still didn't hear the other party say the word remove. For a moment, she froze there, not knowing whether to get up or not. Ning Shuiying naturally wouldn't help her out. She just crossed her arms and watched. She was happy to watch the show. Third Aunt Ning loved her daughter dearly and hurriedly used other words to help her daughter out. Shuiying, come here. You haven't been close to your younger sister Shuima for a long time. You two have a good chat. Ning Shuiying took the opportunity to get up and walk over. I heard that younger sister Shuima has become the Overlord's disciple. Congratulations, congratulations. She said congratulations, but her eyes were full of jealousy. Ning Shuima lightly replied, well said, well said. She didn't feel like exchanging pleasantries with the mother and daughter. What brings you here? Third Aunt Ning exclaimed. Shuima, third aunt and your second sister came specially to see you. We are a family, so we should be intimate. Shuima, now that you have become the Overlord's disciple, you are the glory of the entire Ning family. Chapter 1090. Shuima, you don't know this, but when you succeeded in becoming his disciple, the entire Ning family was overjoyed. They set off firecrackers for several days and held banquets for several days. Shuima, we're family. Now that you've flown to a higher branch, don't forget to support your family. Your sister Shuiying also wants to enter the Sun Moon sect, and it's best if she can also become the ancestor's disciple. That way, you two sisters will have each other's company, right? Why don't you plead with the ancestor and ask him to accept Shuiying? Ning Shuima knew that this mother and daughter pair must have come with a request, but she didn't expect that they would actually ask for this. She almost couldn't help but want to laugh. Before she could open her mouth, Tom, who was beside her, burst out laughing. You're just picking up scraps. Do you think the ancestor is? What kind of Tom, Dick, and Harry want to become his disciple? Ning Shuiying's expression changed, and she fiercely glared at Tom. She should have suffered some kind of loss from Tom, so she didn't dare to get angry after being ridiculed by him. She only sneered. To put it bluntly, Sister Shuima's psychokinesis is still trash, but didn't you also become the ancestor's disciple? This little girl has already cultivated to the 5th rank of a human step, and is known as a genius. The 5th rank of the human step is also called a genius. Tom couldn't help but laugh. The frog at the bottom of the well is short-sighted. He spoke these few sentences in Chinese, and unexpectedly, he didn't say anything wrong. Ning Shuima lazily said, Uncle Zhong, see the guests out. Ning Shuiying steeled her heart and stared at Ning Shuima. Sister Shuima, did you become angry from embarrassment after hearing Sister speak the truth? Then Sister will apologize to Sister. She said that, but she didn't have the slightest intention of apologizing. She took another step forward and reached out to hold Ning Shuima's hand. Little sister, we haven't been close for a long time. Ning Shuima didn't dodge. Ning Shuiying's fingers were grabbing Ning Shuima's wrist. She suddenly channeled her psyche power, and her 5 fingers were like 5 iron claws, trying to pinch Ning Shuima's pulse. She wanted to make Ning Shuima cry like a ghost and make her lose face. However, she did not expect that as soon as she exerted strength in her fingers, she would feel the psychokinesis in her body rushing towards the other party. She could not stop it even if she wanted to. The other party was absorbing her psychokinesis. Ning Shuiying's expression changed drastically. She hurriedly tried to withdraw her hand, but her fingers seemed to be stuck to the other party's wrist. She couldn't withdraw her hand at all. Outsiders only saw her and Ning Shuima holding each other's wrists intimately. How could they know her pain? Third Aunt Ning thought that her daughter had the upper hand. Her old face was full of pride. She stole a glance at Shun Julie's expression. Shun Julie was still expressionless. It was as if he turned a blind eye to this scene. Third Aunt Ning mocked Ning Shuima in her heart. A concubine was a concubine. She would not be noticed by the high and mighty Celestial Master Han. Even if she was at a disadvantage, Celestial Master Han couldn't be bothered to care. Ning Xiuma was just a good-looking girl. After all, she was a good-for-nothing and a jinx. It was understandable that Celestial Master Han didn't care about her. If her daughter married him, with her ability to attract men, Celestial Master Han would definitely dote on her. Third Aunt Ning stood there. Before she could finish her daydream, she suddenly heard a muffled groan. She subconsciously raised her head and saw her daughter suddenly fly out like a rag. With a bang, she stuck to the wall and fell to the ground with a scream. Shuiying, Third Aunt Ning panicked and rushed over to help her daughter up. Chapter 1091. Ning Shuiying also struggled on the ground, trying to get up. She did not expect that as soon as she lifted her upper body, her body would soften and she would fall to the ground again. Her forehead hit the ground heavily. Third Aunt Ning was speechless. Ning Shuiying's forehead was bruised. She tried hard to get up again, but her waist went soft again. She kowtowed again. Just like that, she kowtowed 3 times in a row until a big bruise appeared on her forehead. Only then did she manage to get up. Ning Xiuma smiled lazily. Why do you have to change from arrogance to deference? We're sisters, you don't have to apologize so much. Ning Shuiying was speechless. Ning Xiuma gestured to Uncle Zhong and ordered, "Send the guests out." Ning Shuiying's face was pale. She could feel that all the strength in her body had been drained. She could not find any psychokinesis in her body. In other words, she had lost all her psychokinesis. She had become a useless person. She widened her eyes and stared at Ning Xiuma. "You? What kind of sorcery did you use?" Ning Xiuma glanced at her coldly. "You dare to call the Sun-Moon sex sorcery is sorcery?" Ning Shuiying was speechless. Uncle Zhong had long found this mother and daughter pair unpleasing to his eyes. In the past few months, when Ning Xiuma wasn't around, this mother and daughter pair had visited the Zhong residence many times. They wanted to take advantage of the Zhong residence, but after being rudely chased away by Tom several times, they finally calmed down. Third Aunt Ning did not know what had happened. She only knew that her daughter had suffered a great loss in the hands of Ning Xiuma. She hated it in her heart. Now that this little bitch had taken the ancestor as her master, her martial arts must have improved. They could not afford to offend her anymore. She was more sensible. She knew that it would not be good to offend Ning Shuiying at this time. So she took a step back. "Xiuma, you now Marquis Ning. You're also Celestial Master Han's disciple and the ancestor's disciple. You could be considered glorious. You can't forget your roots and our Ning family. After all, the Ning family's blood flows in your body. You have to help our Ning family. Now that you're not at home all year round, we can't let an outsider take care of the Ning residence. How about this? You hand the Ning residence to us. We promise to take good care of it for you." It turned out that they were eyeing the entire Ning mansion's wealth. Ning Xiuma smiled and tilted her head to look at her. "You want to take care of the Ning mansion?" Yes, you're third and is good at taking care of the family." Third Aunt Ning almost puffed out her chest. "Is your face that big?" Ning Xiuma added in disdain. Third Aunt Ning was speechless. Ning Xiuma took another sip of tea and said indifferently, "The family business in this residence was earned by me, Ning Xiuma. It has nothing to do with the Ning family. Tom, from today onwards, the Ning mansion will be handed over to you. In the future, if any Tom, Dick, or Harry claims to be your relative, feel free to kick them out." Tom was stunned. He glanced at Ning Xiuma and immediately replied, "Okay." Third Aunt Ning jumped up like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. "What? You want to give the Ning mansion to an outsider?" No. The whole Ning family won't agree." Before she could finish, Ning Xiuma looked at Tom with a faint smile. "Tom, someone is shouting in your house." Tom's handsome face tightened. He lifted Third Aunt Ning up with one hand like a chick. "Get lost." Then, Third Aunt Ning was thrown out by Tom like a ball. Third Aunt Ning flew through the air and howled, "Ah! Help! Mother!" Ning Shuiying screamed and rushed out. Chapter 1092. The annoying flies were finally driven out. Ning Xuema believed that they would never come again. As for Ning Shuiying, she had already become a real waste. She would also taste the pain that Ning Xuema had experienced in the past. In the future, Ning Xuema would not have many opportunities to return to the Ning residence. It was unreasonable for the Ning residents to be without a master all year round. After a long time, it would be easy to be targeted by people with ulterior motives. It was better to give it to Tom, who had no relatives or friends. This fellow was a genius in business. She believed that the Ning residents would be able to flourish in his hands. However, Tom was after all a beast who had cultivated into a human. He had to find a proper identity so that he could stay in peace. Ning Xuema had an idea. She asked Tom to change his surname to Ning and let him stay as Marquis Ning's adopted son. This way, it would be proper for him to inherit the Ning residence. Tom originally had no parents in this era. Now that he could have a normal identity, he was naturally willing. He even gave himself the name Ning Tianyu. Ning Xuema simply brought him to the government and registered him as a permanent resident. She had a special identity now. The Ministry of Revenue naturally would not make things difficult for her. They happily registered Ning Tianyu and made him a real member of the Ning residence. The news of Master Han's return was like a bird with wings, spreading in the capital. Lu Hin Ti naturally also received the news. He immediately led the civil and military officials to welcome him. Ning Xuema originally did not want to meet Lu Hin Ti and the others with the Almighty. However, Shun Juli directly kept her by his side, saying that he did not want her to leave his sight. Therefore, she could only sit with him in the hall of the Taoist master residence. When she saw Lu Hin Ti and the others, they came to greet her. Ji Yunhao actually came too. After not seeing him for half a year, he seemed to have lost a lot of weight. He also seemed to have calmed down a lot. He stood in the hall and greeted Shun Juli. His gaze fell on Ning Xuema, faintly complicated. This girl used to be his fiancée. He mistook her for trash and threw her away. When he realized her good points, she could no longer return to his side. He missed it. What had he missed? After all, he was a playboy who often mingled in romantic situations, so he was quite good at judging women. He could tell at a glance that Ning Xuema was still a virgin. Master Han did not consummate their marriage. A glimmer of hope suddenly rose in his heart. Perhaps he still had a chance? After he finished paying his respects, he finally couldn't help but ask, "Will great master still let Shui, Miss Ning, be a concubine?" Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. What was her position in the Almighty's heart? She had already removed her status as a concubine. So what kind of status did the Almighty want her to have? Ning Xuema's gaze also shifted to the great god, wanting to see how he would respond. Shun Jili didn't even glance at Ji Yunhao. Of course, he also ignored his question. Ji Yunhao didn't dare to ask again after being snubbed. A servant reported from outside. His Highness the Crown Prince has come to pay his respects. Ning Xuema's expression changed. Tomorrow was Ji Yunhuang's wedding. She did not expect that he would still have the time to visit the celestial master residence. A moment later, Ji Yunhuang came in. He actually didn't come alone. There was a young girl beside him, a young girl around 12 or 13 years old. That young girl had a pair of lively eyes, a high nose, and full cherry red lips. When she looked at people, she tilted her head slightly. She was very cute. Ji Yunhuang held the girl's hand and walked in. He respectfully cupped his hands towards Shun Jili. He even pulled the girl beside him. "Shui Mo, this is the celestial master Han that I often mention to you. Quickly come and pay your respects." Chapter 1093. The girl naturally went forward to greet him. Even a blind person could see how much he cared for the girl. Shinjuli's eyes darkened slightly, but he did not say anything. Ning Xuema's heart sank. Tomorrow was Ji Yunhuang and Tian Xueching's wedding. Why did Ji Yunhuang bring another girl to greet them today? While she was pondering, Ji Yunhuang had already greeted her. "Marshal Aunt Xuema, long time no see. How have you been?" Ning Xuema looked at Ji Yunhuang. Ji Yunhuang did not look any different from when she had met him on the mountain. His eyes were slightly lowered, and she could not see his state of mind. He had always known how to hide his emotions, and now he was even more profound. His face was as calm as water, and it was hard for others to see any fluctuations in his emotions. Ning Xiuma exchanged a few words with him, and her gaze fell on the girl beside him. She did not know why, but she felt that this girl seemed a little familiar, but she could not remember where she had seen her before. Especially when she tilted her head to look at people, it gave her an indescribable sense of familiarity. Greetings to Marshal Aunt Ning. The girl greeted her cheerfully. Ning Xiuma's heart skipped a beat, and she looked at Ji Yunhuang. Sun Moon sect's rules state that non-disciples cannot address each other as martial aunt or senior brother, unless that person is a family member of a Sun Moon sect disciple. Ji Yunhuang smiled. Don't worry, Yunhuang does not dare to break the sect's rules. Shui Mo is Yunhuang's future Zhao Yi. Ning Xiuma's fingers that were holding the teacup tightened slightly, and Tian Xueqing's figure suddenly flashed in her mind. She suddenly understood everything. Tian Xueqing was forcefully given to Ji Yunhuang by the great god. Ji Yunhuang was afraid that the great god had a knot in his heart because of this, so he purposely brought another girl to greet the great god. This was equivalent to making the great god unhappy. Ning Xiuma could not help but look at Shun Juli. Shun Juli sat there indifferently, as calm as before, without any reaction. However, this was within Ning Xiuma's expectations. The Almighty was a calm emperor, and it was extremely difficult to see any changes in his expression. Ning Xiuma looked at Lu Hinti again. Lu Hinti obviously knew about it. He only looked at his son disapprovingly and didn't say anything. Ji Yunhuang doted on the girl, called Shui Mo. From time to time, he would hold her hand and look at her with a gentle gaze. The crown prince's wedding was not a small matter. There were many complicated procedures involved. Lu Hinti naturally asked Han Shanyue to preside over the wedding ceremony for Ji Yunhuang. Shun Juli's gaze landed on Ji Yunhuang's body. He opened his mouth and spoke a few words that sounded like a Buddhism. When I do things, I don't do it by chance. I'm just going with the flow. Don't lose yourself. Ji Yunhuang stared blankly for a moment before he smiled faintly. Heavenly teacher, I will definitely remember your wondrous words. However, he laughed coldly in his heart. This person had snatched away the person he loved and forced another person onto him. Why did he say something like a Buddhist hymn? It was nothing more than letting him follow the will of the heavens and accept his fate. Shinjuli looked at him for a moment and did not say anything else. The meeting ended with everyone having their own thoughts. The moon in the sky was as big as a round plate. A few wisps of white clouds floated in the sky, occasionally covering half of the moon's face. In the small pavilion, the chess moves on the chessboard were slightly messy. Shinjuli stood in the small pavilion with his back facing the body. He looked up at the moon in the sky and seemed to be lost in thought. When Ning Xiuma finished bathing and came out, she saw such a scene. Did he have something on his mind? Ning Xiuma walked to the chess table and looked at it. This game of chess was not at the level of the Almighty. Chapter 1094. Ning Xiuma looked at the chessboard. It seemed that the Almighty was just playing absent-mindedly. It was rare for him to have something on his mind. Ning Xiuma crossed her arms and leaned against the pillar without saying a word. Are you done? Shinjili turned around and looked at her slowly. Ning Xiuma took a bath in the hot spring in the Celestial Master's residence. Her hair was still half wet, and her face was still bright red from the steam. She looked like a red apple with dewdrops hanging on it, making people want to take a bite. Shinjili raised his hand and wanted to pull her into his arms. Ning Xiuma dodged his fingers and leaned against another pillar. Shinjili was speechless. She seemed to have distanced herself from him these days. Since the day he failed to force her to marry him on the ice field, she no longer allowed him to kiss or hug her. He slowly lowered his arm and sat down at the small table. Play a game with me? Ning Xiuma peeled a grape and threw it into her mouth. I'm not interested at the moment. Almighty, I'm here to bid farewell to you. Bid farewell? Where are you going? Shun Juli looked up at her. Back to the Ning residence, of course. I'm not your concubine anymore, and your Han Shanhua. I can't live with you in the Taoist master's residence as your disciple. I don't have any status, and it's inappropriate for me to stay here. So I'd better go back to the Ning residence. Don't worry, I'll attend the Crown Prince's wedding tomorrow. I won't miss it. Shinjili looked at her for a moment and kept the chessboard. He didn't ask her to stay and only said, "Okay, I'll send you." Ning Xuema was speechless. She felt a little anxious and turned to leave. No need, it's just a few steps away. She walked very quickly and left the courtyard in a moment. Because it was winter and the sky was dark, there were very few people on the street. The few who passed by were in a hurry. Ning Xuema came to the street and was blown by the cold wind. She calmed down. He patted his head. What was wrong with him? Recently, he seemed to have become more calculative. Perhaps the Almighty had something that he couldn't say. The Almighty had his own reasons. Why did he have to haggle over a matter of status with him? Everything would be clear once he reached level 8, so there was no need to rush. Before reaching LV8, he would just enjoy his free and easy life. She simply sang at the top of her lungs. The heavenly Duke tilted slightly, spilling a pot of wine. How many transformations are there in the human world? Heaven's will is outstanding. She raised her eyebrows and stored her noble spirit in her chest. She was 70% crazy and 30% gentle. Truth and falsehood were both sought after. Fame and fortune were exchanged for wine. Sound and appearance are but skin and hair, flesh and blood. The world is full of worries. How many people can be carefree? Leaning on a tall building alone, there would always be people singing and waiting. It's hard to control my wild nature. I will decide whether I stay or leave. After singing, the gloominess in her heart seemed to lessen. Ning Xuema strode forward and attracted the attention of passers-by. She didn't care and sang even louder. What a good fame and fortune are exchanged for wine. Sound and appearance are but skin and hair, flesh and blood. Someone clapped a few times from upstairs. The sound of the clapping was crisp and clear in the night. The voice was vaguely familiar. Ning Xuema heard the voice and looked up. She saw a person standing on the second floor of a restaurant. She was wearing an ordinary green gown and looked thin. Although the night was hazy, Ning Xuema could see her face clearly. It was the Crown Prince's consort, Tian Xueching, in men's clothing. Ning Xuema was stunned. Tian Xueching looked at her and shook the wine cup in her hand. "Are you interested in coming up for a drink?" Chapter 1095. Ning Xuema did not say anything. Her body moved, and she was already standing on the second floor. She smiled and said, "Why not?" Miss Ning is indeed a straightforward person. Tian Xueching smiled and said, "Please, please." Ning Xuema did not stand on ceremony and followed her to the table. They sat opposite each other. This table was located in a very remote location, and there was a screen in front of it, so it could barely be separated from the other tables. Because it was already past meal time, there were not many people eating on the second floor. There were only a few tables of 2s and 3s, and they were all far away from Tian Xueching's table. No one noticed that there was an extra Ning Xuema at this table. Tian Xueching was not a talkative person. Normally, she was even a little taciturn. However, tonight, she drank some wine and was a little tipsy. Her temperament changed slightly, and she was no longer as cold as before. She even took the initiative to say a few words. Ning Xuema was not a meddlesome person. She did not need to ask to know why Tian Xueching came out to drink on the eve of her wedding. Although she sympathized with her, she could not say anything. Both of them had their own thoughts as they drank. After drinking 3 cups of wine, Tian Xueching looked at her and said, "Miss Ning, I have heard about you from him." Her voice was still cold. Ning Xuema naturally knew who she was referring to. She smiled faintly and said, "The Crown Prince and I are only friends." Previously, Xuema was saved by him once. You don't need to misunderstand. Ning Xuema did not want this girl to misunderstand her relationship with Ji Yanhuang. Tian Xueching raised her hand and drank a cup of wine. Her voice was still calm as she said, "Don't misunderstand. I don't have any other intentions. I'm also not jealous. I just don't want you to have any regrets." Ning Xuema was speechless. This was not a good topic to talk about. Ning Xuema bluntly said, I won't have any regrets. The Crown Prince is my friend, and I only treat him as a friend. That's all. Tian Xueqing lowered her eyes slightly and said, Sorry, I don't know how to speak properly. I said the wrong thing. I will punish myself by drinking 3 cups. She nimbly raised her hand and poured 3 cups for herself. Then, she drank them down without hesitation. She didn't seem to be a drinker, and her cheeks were as red as rouge. Ning Xiumao. Tian Xueqing's face was flushed red, but her eyes were as calm as a lake. Miss Ning, I used to dislike you. Ning Xiumao also drank a glass of wine and said directly, I can tell. Her man had his heart set on another woman. Even if he knew that the other woman was innocent, it was difficult for him to like her. It was already good enough that he didn't plot against her behind her back. Tian Xueqing smiled. But I don't hate you. I don't hate anyone. I only hate my own fate. My fate isn't good. Ning Xiumao raised her hand and drank a glass of wine. I don't believe in fate. Tian Xueqing sat there and smiled again. I didn't believe it in the past either. I once fought against this fate, but the result of my struggle was eternal damnation. Ning Xiumao glanced at her and sympathized with her. However, feelings couldn't be forced. Tian Xueqing was casually given to Ji Yun Huang by the ancestor. Ji Yun Huang suffered a loss and naturally fell indignant. It was inevitable that he would vent his anger on Tian Xueqing. Tian Xueqing probably drank too much tonight, so she started to talk more. Actually, I have known him for a long time. This was Tian Xueqing's first sentence. Ning Xiumao raised her eyebrows and didn't interrupt. She waited for Tian Xueqing to continue. Chapter 1096. I was raised as a medicine man since I was young. Naturally, I wasn't willing to accept such a fate. In the winter when I was 12, I finally snuck out. I had never experienced the ways of the world, so I didn't know anything about the outside world. Fortunately, my martial arts weren't bad, so I didn't suffer much during those few days of wandering around. After I escaped, Father sent out many people to find me. In order to avoid these pursuers, I actually had a hard time dealing with them. She paused for a moment before continuing. Later on, when I was avoiding the pursuers, I was saved by a man. She smiled bitterly. That man bought me many clothes and toys to make me happy. At that time, I was still young and naive, so I treated that man as my benefactor and foolishly left with him. When we reached a desolate wilderness, that man's true colors were revealed. It turned out that he was a flower thief with quite a reputation. His martial arts weren't bad, and he gave me a type of medicine like Tendon's softening powder. I couldn't resist, and when I was in despair, the Crown Prince happened to pass by. When she spoke up to hear, Tian Xueqing's eyes lit up slightly. She seemed to have recalled that time when that white-clothed young man had descended from the sky when she was at her lowest point of despair. He'd beaten up that rapist and saved her innocence. He saved me. At that time, he had only just entered the Sun Moon sect and was in high spirits. At that time, he wasn't so cold. Because my clothes were torn, he even gave me his robe. After that, he sent me to the town and left a few dozen taels of silver before leaving. Later on, I was still found by Father's men and brought back. From then on, I never had the chance to leave Tianqing Castle. So you already knew him. Then when you met, did he recognize you? Ning Xiumao asked. Tian Xueqing slowly shook her head, and a bitter smile appeared on her lips. We didn't recognize each other for a long time. He had seen too many women. So how could he remember me? A person he had met by chance? Furthermore, at that time, we didn't exchange our names, so I thought that I would never see him again. Until that day, Mr. Han gave me to him. When I met him, he was only 14 years old. When we met again, he was already a grown man and had changed a lot. When I recognized him, I wanted to thank God that I could finally see him again and become his wife. When he held my hand, I think I was crazy with joy. Ning Xiumao. She could understand Tian Xueqing's joy. A girl named Floating Duckweed was able to marry the man she liked. The joy in her heart was simply bubbling. After my father got me engaged to him, he wanted to bring me back to Tianqing Castle to prepare for the wedding, but I was really afraid. I was afraid that this wasn't real. I was afraid that my father would suddenly go back on his word and give me to someone else, so I did everything I could to stay. I stayed in the courtyard that His Majesty had prepared for me. I think I'm crazy. I know that I'm going to marry him soon, but I still want to see him. She paused for a moment before continuing. Like an idiot, I snuck near the entrance of the Crown Prince's residence, just so that I could see him when he went out. Taking a look was also good. I could like it for a few days just by taking a look. At that time, the vast Sky Empire was preparing for our marriage. My father also sent someone over again to officially set the date of our marriage. I was really happy. I even stopped secretly hating my father. Chapter 1097. Ning Shumal looked at her porcelain-like skin and opened her mouth, wanted to ask something, but in the end, she didn't say anything. She didn't interrupt her. Tian Shueching continued. That night, I was very happy and secretly went to the Crown Prince's residence to see him. I just happened to see him coming out. He came out alone and didn't bring any attendants with him. For some reason, I quietly followed him. He seemed to have a lot on his mind and didn't notice me. I followed him to a restaurant. At first, I thought he had an appointment with someone, but after I went in, I found out that he was drinking alone in a corner. Tian Shueching lowered her eyes and was silent for a moment. Later, he got drunk and staggered out of the door. Naturally, I followed him. He drank too much and fell down not long after he went out. I helped him up and wanted to send him back to the Crown Prince's residence. But he kept saying that he didn't want to go back, so I carried him back to my post house. Ning Shuemal, that night you two did it? Tian Shueching lowered her eyes and answered with a single word, yes. She then smiled bitterly. You might not believe me, but when I first carried him back, I didn't have any other thoughts. I just didn't want him to sleep on the streets. I also arranged for him to sleep in the guest room. He was too drunk and even vomited wine on himself. I didn't have a coachman by my side, only 2 maids. I didn't want the maids to serve him, so I personally wiped him down. Then, I was pulled onto the bed by him. She sighed, I know you must think that he was drunk, but I wasn't. With my martial arts, if I didn't want to do it with him, I should have been able to push him away easily. Yes, I could have done it. But at that time, it was as if I was possessed. I thought that since I was already engaged to him, he was my rightful husband. I also liked him so much so she smiled again, but her smile was somewhat bitter. Only then did I know that he had someone in his heart. That night, when Jin Huang pressed her under his body and entered her, he was calling out Ning Shuma's name. At that time, she felt as if she had been struck by lightning. But what was done could not be undone. There was nothing she could do. Ning Shuma did not say anything. She naturally knew who Ji Yun Huang had in his heart, but she was unable to reciprocate his feelings. She knew that she was in Ji Yun Huang's heart, but she didn't expect him to be so persistent. And then, Ning Shuma cleverly changed the topic. Then, when he woke up the next day, he realized that what was done with me had already been done. He was furious and scolded me before leaving in a huff. How was he just scolding? He almost wanted to chop her into pieces. He had sent her flying with a single slap, causing her to spit out blood. It turned out that such a cultured and refined person was so terrifying when he was angry. His disdainful gaze almost nailed her to death. Ning Shuma couldn't help but sigh again. Then he turned back. Otherwise, he wouldn't have brought her to the Sun Moon sect to report the good news. Tian Shueching drank another cup of wine and faintly said, You should know that my body is very special. It's a cauldron that can help men recover and increase their psychokinesis, but it also has a fatal flaw. Once I'm with someone, that person cannot leave me for 3 years. We have to be together once every 2 days. Chapter 1098. Otherwise, all of his psychokinesis will disappear and he will slowly die. My father did not tell me about this characteristic at first. Later on, when he found out that we had a good relationship, he told me about this characteristic. He even said that it was for my own good. He was afraid that someone would throw me away after using me up, and that I would be loved for at least 3 years. Ning Shuama was speechless. So cauldrons had this characteristic as well. Then, how did the Crown Prince know about this? My father went to tell him. Can you imagine how angry he was when he found out the truth? He came to find me the next night and told me that he would marry me as I wished, but he would only treat me as a cauldron for the rest of his life and would never treat me as his woman. Ning Xuema was speechless. She could not blame Ji and Huang for treating Tian Xueqing coldly. In his heart, he probably thought that Tian Xueqing had taken the opportunity to scheme against him. So, you can blame me for this and not him. If only I did not escape when I was 12 years old. I would not have met him. I would not have. She would not have lost her heart and caused herself to be consigned to eternal damnation. This story made people feel helpless. Ning Xuema could not help but sigh. Then what are you going to do in the future? Tian Xueqing paused for a moment and shook her head slightly. I don't know. She picked up a cup of wine and drank it in one gulp. She had never entered his circle of friends. He almost never introduced her to his friends. Even when he occasionally went out with her, he would completely ignore her. It was as if she was invisible and did not exist. She had always been isolated. At this moment, she was sitting there with an upright posture. Her figure was tall and straight, but it also gave off an inexplicably cold and lonely feeling. Looking at her like this, Ning Xuema felt pity for her. Tian Xueqing was born very beautiful. As a woman, Ning Xuema felt that she was very pleasing to the eye. Ji and Huang really did not know how lucky he was. However, with Ji and Huang's temperament, if she wanted him to really accept her, she was afraid that there was still a long way to go. What's more, Ji and Huang now had an ink-painting little girl by his side. Tian Xueqing drank another glass of wine. I'm going to marry him tomorrow, but I know he hates me. I can't stop him from hating me. In the future, he will still hate me. Ning Xuema couldn't bear it. You don't have to worry too much. That's just a hypothesis. In any case, you're going to be his crown princess tomorrow, and you have the Tianqing castle to support you. Even if he treats you coldly, he won't do anything to you. When he ascends the throne, you will be his empress. As long as you don't make any big mistakes, you will be able to live a peaceful life. How many emperors in this world truly love their empress? Didn't those empresses also live their entire lives in glory? Of course, the prerequisite was that she didn't want the love of the emperor. She looked at Tian Xueqing again and felt a little worried for her. With her cold personality, would she really be able to live a peaceful life in the harem where women gathered together and there was constant infighting? What's more, Ji and Huang hated her so much. No. Tian Xueqing suddenly raised her head and said in a calm voice, if he doesn't like me, I won't stay by his side. I'll give myself 3 years. If he continues to hate me in these 3 years, I will leave him. I won't be a stumbling block for him. Ning Xuema felt relieved for her. This girl was actually a proud person. She was not the kind of person who was completely at the mercy of fate. Chapter 1099. This girl was only 17 years old this year. 3 years later, when she finished her task as a cauldron, Ji and Huang could leave her. She was only 20 years old, so if she really couldn't do it, it would not be too late for her to leave. However, by that time, she would already be the crown princess. According to the rules of this era, even if Ji and Huang abolished her position as the crown princess, he would not divorce her. Of course, he would not let her marry someone else. The imperial family usually treated their unwanted concubines by banishing them to the cold palace. After 3 years, how much of your martial arts will you have left? Ning Xuema could not help but ask. My cauldron can only help one person increase their martial arts. After 3 years, my medicinal body will completely disappear, but my martial arts will not disappear too much. I should have no problem protecting myself in Jianghu. Tian Xueqing was also a smart person. She had obviously thought of the problem that Ning Xuema was worried about. Her voice was indifferent and cold. I will conceal my identity and live the life of an ordinary person. I will give him complete freedom. At that time, he will only need to announce that I have passed away. It turned out that she had already thought of a way out. As expected, she did not blindly go with the flow. Ning Xuema could not help but size her up again. Her gaze was filled with admiration. It was not easy for a girl in this era to have such thoughts. She poured a cup of wine and raised it. Xueqing, I toast you. The two of them drank one cup, and unknowingly, more than 2 hours had passed. The two of them drank quite a lot. Ning Xuema's alcohol tolerance was very good. She was the type that would not get drunk after 1,000 cups. However, Tian Xueqing's alcohol tolerance was also very good. After drinking so much, other than her face being a little red, she was still sober. She did not even stutter when she spoke. Of course, she was more talkative than usual. Perhaps it was because she had always been alone and did not have any friends. It was rare for her to meet someone who was willing to drink and chat with her, so she was able to talk a lot. For example, her experience when she was refined into a medicinal body. For example, her experience in Tianqing Castle. She played it down, but Ning Xuema was shaken to the core when she heard it. Cauldrons were extremely difficult to refine. Not only did they need a specific birth date and 8 characters, they also needed a strong constitution. Because she had to soak in the medicinal bath every day, the water was so hot that it could almost burn off a layer of her skin. At that time, she had to soak in the boiling hot water for 6 hours every day. Furthermore, he had to drink all kinds of medicine every day. If he wasn't careful, he would be poisoned by the medicine and struggle on the verge of death. Under the effects of these drugs, a layer of her skin would peel off like a snake shedding its skin every year. Every time her skin peeled off, she would be in so much pain that she wanted to roll around. However, every time she shed her skin would become even more tender and smooth. Ning Xuema had never thought that a man-made cauldron would actually have to suffer like this. He had never expected that there would be such a heartless father in this world who would use his own daughter to refine a cauldron weapon. Tian Xueqing's position in the Tianqing Castle was awkward. Everyone knew that she was a cauldron that would be given away. On the surface, they were polite and respectful to her, but in reality, no one treated her as a friend. She also didn't have the time to make friends. Apart from soaking in medicinal baths, she also practiced martial arts under the guidance of an arcane master. This was because the higher her martial arts, the more useful she would be as a cauldron. This torturous life continued until she was 16. At 16, she finally became a perfect cauldron that even the Tianqing Castle Lord was proud of. Then, she was given away. Then, due to a mishap, she was about to become the crown princess of Jianhua. Chapter 1100. Xuema, do you know? When I was being refined, I was suffering. I told myself that everything would be fine after I turned 16. After I turned 16, I would be able to live a normal life. I didn't want to be rich, I just wanted to be ordinary. Until I met him, I thought that the heavens were finally looking after me. It turned out that I could also obtain happiness. I didn't expect that in the blink of an eye, it would be like the moon reflected in the water. Ning Xuema took a deep breath. You don't have to be so dispirited. Actually, you can also be happy. A woman's happiness can't only be given by a man. You can also be happy yourself. I can still be happy? Tian Xueqing's eyes were like a lake. There seemed to be dark waves surging in her calm eyes. In the end, she was only a 17-year-old girl. No matter how calm she was, she still had the longing of a young girl. You can. Ning Xuema only replied with 2 words. She secretly made up her mind that she would come to Vast Sky Empire again 3 years later to see this crown princess. If she still didn't obtain happiness at that time and really wanted to leave, then Ning Xuema would use her own methods to help this girl. Thank you. Tian Xueqing smiled. She was born cold, so when she smiled, it was like a red plum blossom suddenly blooming in the snow. The waiter who came to refill their wine was also stunned. Ning Xuema raised her wine cup and smiled. The two drank a few more cups. Then, the sound of the night watch came from the street. Ning Xuema stood up. It's getting late. You should go back. I'll attend your wedding tomorrow. Tian Xueqing also stood up, but she suddenly swayed a few times and almost fell down. Ning Xuema raised her hand to support her. Are you okay? Did this girl drink too much? The redness on Tian Xueqing's face gradually faded. She pursed her thin lips. I'm fine. Her body swayed again and was about to collapse. I'll send you back. Ning Xiuma didn't hesitate to support her. Where are you staying now? No need, I'll go back by myself. Tian Xueqing finally stood up straight. Suddenly, there was some movement downstairs. Then, she heard the waiter lead 2 people upstairs. The waiter's voice was full of respect. Would your highness like a single room? Your highness? Ning Xiuma raised her eyebrows and leaned out to take a look. Then, she was slightly startled. The 2 people who came in were the crown prince, Jian Huang, and the little beauty called Shui Mo. Jian Huang was obviously a little tipsy as his body swayed slightly. However, he did not have any intention of asking for a private room. No need. This hall is fine. It's bright and spacious. The waiter naturally wouldn't disobey him and arranged for them to sit at a well-lit table. Their position was close to the staircase, so unless Ning Xiuma and Xiao Luo jumped out of the window, they would not be able to escape Ji Yunhuang's line of sight. As long as they walked out of this small screen, they would come face to face with Ji Yunhuang. Ning Xiuma couldn't help but look at Tian Xueqing. Tian Xueqing's face was slightly pale. She sat down again and didn't say anything. She picked up the wine and drank another cup. Ning Xiuma frowned. After thinking for a while, she sat down as well. With the arrival of the crown prince, the speed at which the dishes were served was naturally fast. After a while, the table was filled with sumptuous dishes. Your Highness, it's already late. You shouldn't drink anymore. You still have to get married tomorrow. It's not good to get drunk. The little girl called Shui Mo couldn't help but advise him. Ji Yunhuang drank a cup of wine and sneered. He lazily said, "Don't worry, this prince knows what to do." Chapter 1101. But you've already drunk a few jars of wine. Shui Mo did not give up. If you drink too much, how are you going to perform the ceremony tomorrow? Ji Yunhuang snorted. Even if I'm drunk and can't get up tomorrow, Imperial Father will still let people carry me to the end of the ceremony. This is the position that woman schemed for. He seemed to have drunk too much and spoke more than usual. When he reached this point, he felt that he had made a mistake and stopped talking. He poured a cup of wine and said, "Don't mention that woman. Let's drink. IMO, this prawn is not bad, try it." He peeled the shell of a prawn and placed it on the plate in front of Shui Mo. Shui Mo tasted it and beamed with joy. "It's really delicious. Your Highness, I want to eat more." Jian Huang was very patient with her and peeled another prawn for her. Ning Xiuma's fingers held the wine cup tightly. Although she knew that Jian Huang had a special liking for Shui Mo and wanted to take her as his concubine, it was not good for him to drink with another woman on the eve of his wedding with Tian Xueqing, right? He even showed off his love with this woman. As for Tian Xueqing's face was slightly pale, but there was no other expression on her face. Ning Xiuma's heart skipped a beat. Looking at Tian Xueqing's reaction, it seemed that she often saw Ji Yunhuang treat Shui Mo like this, outside. Ji Yunhuang doted on the girl called Shui Mo very much. From time to time, he would give her some food, and Shui Mo would enjoy it with a clear conscience. It was obvious that she was used to it. Ji Yunhuang drank wine as if he was drinking water. In just a moment, he had finished an entire jar of wine. Tian Xueqing sat there calmly. Other than her face being slightly pale, she did not have any other reaction. She wanted to wait until Ji Yunhuang left. If Ji Yunhuang did not leave, she would continue to drink here. The one who did something wrong was Ji Yunhuang, right? What was Tian Xueqing afraid of? What was there to be afraid of? Ning Xiuma felt a little stuffy. She put the wine cup on the table and said, "Xueqing, it's getting late. Let's go back." She did not deliberately lower her voice. On the contrary, her voice was very clear. It was especially loud in this rather quiet restaurant. Clang! Something on Ji Yunhuang's table seemed to have fallen onto the ground and rolled around on the ground. The moment Ning Xiuma spoke, Tian Xueqing's face turned even paler, but she didn't say anything. She slowly stood up and said, "Okay, let's go." Ning Xiuma and Tian Xueqing came out from behind the screen one after another, and they happened to come face to face with Ji Yunhuang, who had just stood up. The wine cup on Ji Yunhuang's table had disappeared and was rolling on the floor. However, his expression was calm, as though he was not worried about being caught. He did not even look at Tian Xueqing. Instead, he looked at Ning Xuemo with a complicated look in his eyes. Xuemo, I didn't expect to implicate you again today. Where did this come from? Ning Xuemo raised her eyebrows. What do you mean, Your Highness? Why didn't she understand? Ji Yanhuang finally looked at Tian Xueqing. His eyes were as cold as ice, without the slightest bit of warmth. He said indifferently, Tian Xueqing, this prince and Xue Mo are open and above board. She will be this prince's good wife in the future. You don't need to waste your efforts to let Xuemo know about this matter. She already knows about it. Ning Xuemo was speechless. Wait a minute. Did His Highness mean that Tian Xueqing had specially invited her to catch him and Xue Mo in the act? Did he think that Tian Xueqing deliberately followed him and then called her over? Chapter 1102. She was just passing by, all right? Furthermore, she and Tian Xueqing were here first. Your Highness, did you decide to come here on the spur of the moment, or did you plan this beforehand? Ning Xuemo asked as she crossed her arms. Ji Yanhuang frowned slightly. Before he could say anything, Xue Mo, who was beside him, quickly said, We decided to come here on the spur of the moment. When we passed by just now, Your Highness wanted to drink more, so we came in. We didn't expect Sister Xueqing and Martial Uncle Ning to be here. Ning Xuemo smiled again. Then I don't understand what Your Highness said just now. Xueqing and I have been sitting here for almost 4 hours, and we had a very harmonious conversation. However, Your Highness and Miss Xue have only been here for half an hour. We don't have the ability to predict the future, so how did it become Xueqing's scheme? Furthermore, she didn't specially invite me here. It was just a coincidence that we met by chance and drank a few cups of wine together. Your Highness, are you thinking too much? Ji Yanhuang was speechless. Ning Xuemo's words were really sharp. However, it also explained a lot of things. It seemed that he had misunderstood. He couldn't help but look at Tian Xueqing. Suddenly, his expression changed, and he took a step forward. You drank? Tian Xueqing took a step back but tripped on something. She staggered, and her face became even paler. The smell of alcohol on her body was not small. Ji Yanhuang could smell it clearly even before he got close to her. His face immediately darkened. Tian Xueqing, are you courting death? His voice was so cold that it was as if there were ice shards outside. Tian Xueqing had already straightened her body. She pursed her lips and didn't have any intention to speak. Although it was wrong to come out to drink on the eve of the wedding, it didn't mean that she was courting death, right? Ji Yanhuang's words were too much. Ning Xuemo was unhappy. She raised her eyebrows and was about to say something when Ji Yanhuang spoke again. If you want to court death, don't drag others down with you. Aren't you afraid that your maid won't be able to find you by coming out like this? Tian Xueqing's face slightly paled and said, I know what I'm doing. You know what you're doing. Ji Yanhuang's voice raised a few octaves as he sneered. You know what you're doing is drinking on the eve of the wedding. Don't you find it embarrassing? You even dragged Xuemo to drink with you. I'll say one more thing. We just met by chance. We can't say who's involved who. Your Highness, you don't have to involve me. Ning Xuemo finally opened her mouth, and her voice was cold. Wasn't it just a drink? It wouldn't affect tomorrow's wedding. So why was Ji Yanhuang so angry? Ji Yanhuang was stunned. He finally realized that his words had put Ning Xuemo in an awkward position. His eyes darkened slightly. Xuemo, don't misunderstand. I don't mean to blame you, Ning Xuemo said indifferently. It's just a drink. I don't think the crown prince will get angry over it. Also, even though Miss Xueqing will be marrying you tomorrow, she's still free today. She can do whatever she wants and doesn't seem to need the permission of others. In Vast Sky Kingdom, it's normal for a lady to drink in a restaurant, so there's nothing shameful about it. Ji Yanhuang was speechless. He could faintly feel that Ning Xuemo was dissatisfied with him. Did this Tian Xueqing say something bad about him behind his back? Ji Yanhuang's gaze shifted to Tian Xueqing's face, and his expression suddenly changed. Tian Xueqing's face was already very pale. Her forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat, and she stood there swaying. Ning Xuemo, turned her head and noticed Tian Shueqing's abnormality. She was shocked and hurriedly supported her, raising her hand to check her pulse. Chapter 11:03. Her pulse was erratic, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, and sometimes fast. Her lips were pale and blue. These were the symptoms of being poisoned. She was poisoned. Damn it, how did she get poisoned? She and Tian Shueqing ate and drank the same things. Ning Xuemo reached out to take the wine cup and chopsticks that Tian Shueqing used. They used the same things except for these two items. If someone wanted to poison them, they could only poison them on these two items. Jian Huang was also a smart person. He immediately understood what Ning Xuemo wanted to do. He took a deep breath and said, "Xuemo, don't be busy. No one poisoned them." Ning Xuemo raised her eyes in astonishment. Jian Huang continued, "To her, wine is a poison that penetrates her intestines." Ning Xuemo was speechless. Could it be related to her medicinal body? Although Ning Xuemo was knowledgeable, she had never studied this cauldron. Naturally, she did not know the taboos and did not know how to treat Tian Shueqing. She immediately looked at Jian Huang and asked, "You know the antidote, right?" Otherwise, he would not have said such words. "I have the antidote. I will go back and take it." Tian Shueqing was about to go downstairs. At this moment, she was obviously in extreme pain. However, she straightened her back and walked out with large strides. Jian Huang frowned and raised his hand to stop her. Then, he quickly took out a small leather pouch from his body and unplugged its stopper. Without any explanation, he stuffed the pouch into Tian Shueqing's mouth. It was unknown what he had fed her. Tian Shueqing was very weak at this moment. She could not break away from him. After a few mouthfuls, she choked and coughed. Jian Huang immediately let go of her after feeding her the medicine. It was as if there was a deadly virus in her body. He then ordered Shuemo, who was beside him, help her to the bathroom at the back. Shuemo was stunned. He looked at Tian Shueqing and then looked at Jian Huang. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he held back and agreed. Okay. He went forward to help Tian Shueqing. However, Tian Shueqing suddenly took a step back and said, "No need. I could do it myself." She turned around and rushed to the bathroom at the back. A moment later, the sound of vomiting came from behind. "Shuemo, go watch her. Don't let her fall into the toilet bowl," Jian Huang coldly instructed. Shuemo was obedient and immediately ran over as well. Ning Xuemo frowned slightly and was about to follow them when Jian Huang spoke again. "Xuemo, you don't have to go. She'll be fine after vomiting. She won't die." Ning Xuemo, she took a deep breath. "I didn't know she couldn't drink. If she had known earlier, she would have stopped her instead of drinking with her." Jian Huang raised his hand and rubbed the space between his eyebrows. "I only found out after I got together with her. Did you give her the antidote?" Ning Xuemo was still a little worried. "Sort of. What other taboos does she have?" Ning Xuemo glanced at the dishes on the table. Could there be taboos among them? Jian Huang paused. "In fact, other than certain foods, she can't eat anything else. Other foods are also poisonous to her." Ning Xuemo. So the price to pay for this cauldron was so high. Yin Wang, treat her better. It's not easy for her. She asked for it. Jian Huang was not moved. Ning Xuemo was angry. "Do you think she wants to be a drug maker? Do you think she wants to like you?" The sound of footsteps came from behind. Tian Shueqing was walking back quickly. Chapter 11:04. It seemed that the medicine that Jian Huang gave her was really effective. Not long after she ate it, her complexion had already returned to normal after vomiting. She walked very quickly, and Shuemo almost couldn't catch up with her. "Shuemo, thank you," Tian Shueqing said. "Thank you for being willing to accompany me and talk to me, so that I won't be so lonely anymore. Thank you for explaining to me. You almost implicated her," Jian Huang coldly said. "She didn't know the inside story and was drinking with you out of goodwill. If you died here because of drinking, she would become the suspect. Tian Shueqing, can you use your brain before you act so willfully?" Tian Shueqing finally turned to look at him. Her eyes were as deep as a pool and as dark as the night, causing Ji Yunhuang's heart to inexplicably tighten. He couldn't continue speaking. I won't die. Tian Shuiching slowly opened her mouth. Her voice was as calm as the thick layer of snow outside. How can a scheming person like me be willing to die like this? Ji Yunhuang choked. You dash, Tian Shuiching faintly smiled. That smile was extremely faint. I still want to be your crown princess. If I don't sit on that position, how can I die? After saying this, she no longer looked at Ji Yunhuang's ashen face. She turned around and walked down the stairs in large strides. Her qigong was not bad. In the blink of an eye, that lonely and thin figure disappeared into the snow. Ning Xiuma naturally didn't want to stay here any longer. Your Highness, please continue. I will also take my leave. She also walked out with large strides. When she entered the restaurant, there was still a full moon outside. However, after drinking for a few hours in the restaurant, it was already snowing outside. It seemed like the weather was about to change again. She braved the cold snow and directly walked towards the Ning residence. She drank a lot of wine, so she needed to have a good sleep so that she could attend the wedding tomorrow. She didn't feel anything when she was in the restaurant, but now that the cold wind was blowing outside, she felt a little dizzy and her vision blurred. She didn't know what she tripped over in her haste, but she staggered and almost fell. Suddenly, someone grabbed her arm and pulled her back to reality. Ning Xiuma fell into someone's arms. She raised her head and saw Shun Julie's handsome face. She blinked her eyes and looked at him in disbelief. Almighty, which corner did you pop out from? Shun Julie did not answer her drunken words. He directly carried her up by her waist and strode forward. Hey, where are you taking me? I want to go back to the Ning mansion. Ning Xiuma had drunk too much. Now that she was drunk, she started to throw a tantrum. I'll send you back to Ning mansion. I can walk by myself. I don't need you to send me off. Are you sure you can walk on your own? Shun Jili finally put her down. Then, Ning Xiuma realized that her legs were miserably unable to move. They were stuck there like wooden stakes. It must be him. Ning Xiuma struggled a few times on the spot. She struggled until she was covered in sweat, but she didn't move a single step. Are you sober now? The Almighty floated by her side like an immortal. She was covered in sweat, so naturally, her drunkenness was reduced. Shinjili did not wait for her to answer. He picked her up again and continued to walk forward. I knew you couldn't walk. Ning Xiuma wanted to bite him, but after thinking about it, she decided not to. Since he was willing to carry her, it saved her a lot of energy. She simply buried her head in his chest and stopped tormenting him. She only muttered, "Thank you so much." Shun Julie ignored her and carried her forward. The wind and snow filled the sky, but it didn't blow on them. Chapter 1105. Ning Xiuma felt sleepy and tipsy as she dozed off in his embrace. She said in a daze, "Great God, I feel like you look very familiar." Shun Julie. They had already reached this point, yet she only said that he looked familiar. "Great God, I often dream of you," she muttered again. Shun Julie's lips hooked up into a smile. What you think of in the day, you dream of it at night. It seems like she really liked him, even dreaming of him. He looked down at her in his arms and kissed her on the lips. Recently, she had been at odds with him, so he hadn't kissed her in a long time. Her lips were full and soft with a faint wine fragrance. His heart was moved, and he couldn't help but deepen the kiss. "Great God, you like me, right? But why didn't you propose to me?" She pouted in her dream. Shun Julie, his eyes were slightly deep as he sighed. "Shuema, quickly level up." He actually couldn't wait any longer. Is it because of my identity as a heavenly cursed loner? Are you actually afraid of me? Ning Xiuma usually hid her thoughts very deeply and didn't reveal them. But at this time, she was really drunk. In this half-dazed state, she couldn't hide her thoughts and unknowingly asked about some of her tangled thoughts. Shun Julie was startled. So that's what she was thinking about. He looked down at her and didn't say anything. He only hugged her tighter. "Idiot, Shun Julie like someone. Don't say that you're a heavenly cursed loner. Even if you're a demon and my enemy, if I like you, then it's still like you." He carried her and slowly walked back to the Ning residence. The quiet streets, the girl in his arms. So what if the sky was filled with snow? As long as they were together, it would be a paradise. When they returned to the Ning residence, the servants were naturally busy again. A moment later, Ning Shumo was already sleeping soundly on her own gums. Shunjuli tucked her in. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, he lowered his head and saw a gentle light slowly peeking out from her chest. His fingers paused, and he stopped moving. The gentle light grew brighter and brighter, and a flute gradually slid out from her arms. It slid forward bit by bit with a rise and fall of her breathing. The light was as gentle as the moonlight and not dazzling. Moonlight flute. Didn't she put it in her storage pouch? Why did he come out on his own? Shinjuli's eyes fell on the flute. He watched it slide over Ning Shuama's chest, shoulders, and finally slide down to her pillow. It glowed faintly under her hair. Ning Shuama's brows furrowed slightly, but she didn't show any other signs of discomfort. She just gently turned her body, and then Na Xiao was squeezed under the pillow by her head. Shanjuli reached out to pick up the flute, but he seemed to have thought of something and stopped. He simply sat down beside her. He gently pressed his fingers on her wrist. Her breathing was very stable, and her blood vessels were normal. The flute under her pillow didn't seem to have any adverse effects on her. Was he overthinking? Was it just a coincidence that the flute slipped out? Shunjuli sat beside her for a while. Just as he was about to look at the flute again, Ning Shumo, who was lying on the pillow, suddenly tensed up and trembled slightly. She hissed softly, "Divine Lord, please be gentler." "Ugh, it hurts." Her voice sounded like she was in pain and pleasure. It was as if a young girl was having sex for the first time. Her face was faintly flushed. Shunjuli was speechless. Chapter 1106. His expression changed, and he reached out to touch the space between her eyebrows. He had the ability to read people's memories, and naturally, he also had the ability to read people's dreams. If he touched her forehead, he would be able to see Ning Shuama's dream clearly. Just as his fingertip was about to touch her forehead, he seemed to have thought of something and stopped. He paused for a moment and then slowly retracted his hand. He remembered that the last time he read her memories, he had angered her and almost made her fall out with him. If he did not ask for her permission and she found out, she would probably be upset and say that he did not respect her. Forget it. It was just a dream. It was nothing. He just did not expect this little girl to have wet dreams too. The man in the dream was him, the Divine Lord. He was indeed called the Divine Lord many years ago. He did not expect to hear it from her mouth. Was it a coincidence? Or was she the girl who had interacted with him before? Could it be that her dream was a dream from her previous life? Shunjuli could not help but want to reach out his finger again. However, Ning Shumo turned over and lay on her stomach, leaving only the back of her head for him to see. Shunjuli was speechless. This position, was she not afraid of being suffocated? Shunjuli decisively reached out and turned her body over so that her face was facing up. He casually brushed the messy hair on her forehead to the side. His fingertip brushed past her forehead and did not stop. Since he had promised that he would never touch her privacy again, he would keep his promise. Perhaps it was just a coincidence that she called him the Divine Lord. After all, she had always called him the Divine Lord. Sometimes she called him the Divine Lord. Sometimes she called him the Great God. Perhaps she had mixed the two together in her dreams. He looked at her little face and saw that it was getting redder and redder. She was biting her red lips lightly, and her eyebrows were slightly furrowed. Her appearance made his mouth dry up in an instant. He could not help but lean down again and kiss her red lips. She moaned and actually raised her arms to hug his neck, passionately responding to him. It had been a long time since she had been so intimate with him. It was familiar, warm, fragrant, tender, and seductive. Her lips were as soft as tofu, tightly entangling him. Her delicate body was pressed tightly against his body, causing his breathing to instantly become heavier. The hand that was holding her shoulders tightened its grip. "It hurts," she whispered. "You're hurting me." Shunjuli's fingers loosened slightly. Ning Shumo suddenly pulled him onto the bed. Then, she turned over and pressed him underneath her. Let, let me do it. Shun Julie narrowed his eyes and looked at her as she sat on top of him. Her words were unclear, but her actions were not. Was she dreaming, or did he wake up? He looked at her face playfully. Her hair was scattered on both sides of his face like a curtain. Her little face was flushed, but her eyes were still slightly closed. Was he still dreaming? Was she that ferocious in his dreams? This was the first time in his life that he was pressed down by someone. He was surprised and amused at the same time. He raised his hand to support her swaying body. He did not say anything and just watched her movements. Ning Xiuma did not open her eyes. After she sat on top of him and swayed a few times, she raised her hand to touch his collar that was always neat and tidy. She chuckled. "You're buttoning it so tightly. You're such an abstinent person. It makes me want to strip you off even more." Shun Julie. Her little hand was soft and smooth as she tugged at his collar. Chapter 11:07. For a moment, their rhythm was messed up, their breathing was messed up. Their skin touched, and they could hear each other's breathing. His kiss and his fingers were everywhere, making her feel as if she was floating in the clouds, as if she was being roasted on a fire. She was sweating profusely, and her sweat seemed to carry the smell of wine, making Shun Julie almost intoxicated. He knew this was wrong, but she was too beautiful, making him unable to stop. His eyes seemed to be burning with fire, wanting to burn her into ashes and completely embed her into each other's bodies. In the chaos, Ning Xiuma's clothes were torn, and her body was almost naked. Shun Julie hugged her. His eyes were like rolling waves, wanting to completely engulf her. Dong! Dong! Suddenly, there were two light sounds outside the door, as if someone was knocking. Although the sound was not loud, it completely shocked Shun Julie back to reality. He suddenly turned over, lying on the other side of the big bed. Then, he raised his sleeve, and a brocade quilt wrapped Ning Xiuma tightly. "Who is it?" He took a deep breath, calming his chaotic breathing. His hand brushed his body, and his clothes returned to normal. In a flash, he was already standing in front of the door. When the door opened, a cold wind whistled past. Outside the door, there was no one. The sound just now was clearly the sound of someone knocking on the door. How could there be no one? Shun Julie's figure flashed, and he was already floating in the air. He looked around, and his eyebrows wrinkled. It was already late at night, and the whole Ning mansion was silent. Other than the night patrol, there was no one else. The night patrol was a familiar warrior of the mansion, and they were all loyal people. Moreover, they were quite far from here, so it was impossible for them to escape so quickly. Did he hear wrongly? Shun Julie confirmed that there was nothing strange around, and then he floated down. He didn't set up a protective barrier, so the falling snowflakes fell on his body and head, making his boiling blood gradually calm down. He almost made a big mistake. Thinking back to the scene just now, he felt a little scared. Although the knocking sound was strange, it did him good and not bad. Perhaps it was the wind mixed with the snowflakes knocking on the door. He looked up at the sky. The red clouds were so thick that they looked like they were about to fall. Rumble. Another rumble of thunder came from the depths of the clouds. The sound was muffled and distant, but it rang clearly in his ears. His expression returned to its usual indifference and coldness. The corners of his lips curled up slightly as he nonchalantly sat down in front of the stone table in Ning Xiuma's courtyard. He lowered his eyes and meditated. The snowflakes danced wildly around him, but not a single one landed on him. He sat there for a while and suddenly thought of something. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Ning Xiuma's bed and looked down at her. She had fallen asleep once again, and the moonlight flute was pressed under her body, with only the tip of the flute exposed. The light in his eyes deepened slightly as he deftly removed the moonlight flute from under her body and held it in his hand. The vertical bamboo flute was slightly hotter than Ning Xiuma's body temperature. This vertical bamboo flute was strange. Shun Julie's palm emitted a white light, completely enveloping the moonlight flute. The body of the moonlight flute suddenly trembled slightly, as if there was something struggling inside, wanting to break out of the flute. Shun Julie urged the psychokinesis in his palm again, and a thin fingernail-sized piece shot out from the vertical bamboo flute. But the moment it touched the air, it turned into ashes and disappeared. Chapter 1108. Shun Julie's expression changed. Although the thin piece disappeared quickly, it didn't escape his eyes. It was like a dream-eating goo. This kind of goo could devour a person's dream, and then transmit the scene in the dream to the person who planted the goo. Because this goo's appearance was very similar to the flute membrane, it was very difficult to detect. And this goo was a top-grade dream-eating goo. The disguise technique actually made him unable to see through it. Shinjuli held the flute, his gaze turning cold. Who was the one who deliberately wanted to peek into a girl's dream? What was the purpose? Could it be Shuelan in a deserted house? There was no path, the house was dilapidated, and the door was rustling in the cold wind. However, a red light could be seen faintly in one of the halls. A man in red was sitting on an armchair in the main hall. In front of him was a sparkling mirror. What was reflected in the mirror was not his peerless appearance, but a vast expanse of clouds and mist. It was very much like the snowflakes on a TV screen when there was no program on. His fingers were clenching the bronze mirror so tightly that his fingertips turned white. What was shown in the bronze mirror just now was Ning Xiuma's dream. In the dream, she directly transformed into Shui Emo and Shun Julie's wedding. That big red 11 character and the big red wedding hall stung his eyes, making his fingers clench even tighter. Although he knew that those things were in the past and couldn't be changed, he still couldn't help but want to jump in and separate the two people. But he resisted in the end. His dream-eating goo had an additional function that no one knew about compared to the goo worms refined by ordinary goo masters. He could control the dream-eating goo to change the original scene in the dream and change some things. But if he changed it, it would cover up the truth he wanted to know. This was not what he wanted. So he watched in the bronze mirror as they went through the wedding ceremony. Shinjuli was indeed arrogant. On the wedding day, he didn't wear the groom's red robe, but wore a white robe with plum blossoms painted on it. Only the red plum blossoms at the corner of the robe died, a little happy. He watched them enter the bridal chamber hand in hand, watched them drink wine together, watched Shui Emo hug Shun Julie's neck and kiss him, and even pushed him down on the wedding bed. In the dream, Shun Julie's expression was a little strange. He seemed to be struggling, especially that pair of eyes, as deep as the sea. In the end, he seemed to have decided something, turned from passiveness to initiative. He said a sentence in Shui Emo's ear, Shui Emo's lips, but Shui Ilan could read lips, so he immediately read it. What Shun Julie said was, "For him, are you going to fight for him? I'll help you." Shui Ilan's mind was shaken, and he almost lost his grip on the mirror. It turned out that at that time, Shun Julie already knew Shui Emo's purpose of trying to get close to him, but he didn't expose that Shui Ilan was a little distracted. When he came back to his senses and looked at the mirror again, he found that the scene had completely changed. It was no longer the red bridal chamber and the red wedding bed. What appeared in the mirror was Ning Xiuma's boudoir in the Ning mansion. On the big bed, Shun Julie was entangled with Ning Xiuma. Because Ning Xiuma was half awake and half dreaming at that time, the scene in the bronze mirror was blurred, as if it was separated by countless layers of fog. Shui Ilan couldn't see the specific movements of the two people, only two vague silhouettes. But these two silhouettes were as sharp as knives to him, making his blood rush to the top of his head in an instant. Chapter 1109. Naturally, he knew what had happened. He cursed under his breath and sent a strand of his primordial spirit into the bronze mirror without hesitation. He knocked on the door of Ning Xiuma's room with the power of his primordial spirit. This method of splitting one's primordial spirit consumed a lot of primordial spirit and couldn't be sustained for long. Therefore, after knocking twice with all his might, his primordial spirit returned automatically. He was so tired that he spat out a mouthful of blood and panted for a while. He was so dizzy that he couldn't come back to his senses for a long time. By the time he came back to his senses, he suddenly heard a blood-curdling screech coming from the bronze mirror. He raised his head in shock, only to discover that there was a flash of blood in the bronze mirror before disappearing. It was as if the bronze mirror's signal had been cut off. Ning Shuima's dream no longer appeared. Needless to say, his venomous spell was discovered by Shun Juli, and he destroyed it, so that he couldn't peek into Ning Shuima's dream from her previous life. Damn it! He slammed the bronze mirror shut and slowly walked out of the door. The snowflakes in the courtyard were scattered by the wind. There was not a single star in the sky, only rolling dark clouds. He suddenly smiled and raised his hand to catch a few snowflakes. He sniffed them, and this time, even his eyebrows were curved. Shun Juli, you stole Momo from me 3,000 years ago. How can I let you steal Shuima again after 3,000 years? She will be mine. I let her down 3,000 years ago. In this life, I will do my best to make it up to her. I will pamper her and make her fall in love with me. Ning Shuima woke up in a daze, and her face was slightly red. She had a wet dream, and it was a wet dream that felt very real. In her dream, she and the Almighty had consummated their marriage and made love to each other. His kiss, his hands, his caresses. She had even tasted that piercing pain. The intensity of it felt like it really happened. When she woke up, she could still feel her heart beating very fast. She touched her burning face. Was she crazy about marrying the Almighty? She actually dreamed of this. She rubbed the space between her eyebrows and sat up. The brocade blanket slipped off her body, and she saw the clothes she was wearing. It was a brand new and comfortable nightgown. The style was similar to the ones the Almighty usually gave her. It was a little conservative and even covered half of her neck. She stood there in a daze for a moment, and the scene from last night began to flash through her mind. The alcohol from last night was so strong that it actually knocked her out. However, she still had a deep impression of what happened in the restaurant last night. After all, she wasn't drunk at that time. It seemed that the moment she stepped out of the restaurant, the wind blew and the alcohol came back. She seemed to have almost tripped and fell into someone's arms. She sat on the bed in a daze for a moment before jumping up. Could it be that my wet dream was real? Was it not an illusory dream? The Almighty had sex with her while she was drunk? She steeled her heart and took off her nightgown to check her body. Then she found that there were all kinds of strawberries planted all over her body, even in some sensitive areas. This was definitely not something that could be formed in a dream. Then she felt a little sore in her lower abdomen and waist. There was even a strange feeling in that area. After all, Ning Shuima had never experienced this before. All her experience in this area came from the internet or novels. She didn't know what it was like for a girl to experience her first time. She was stunned for a moment and couldn't help but look down. Then she was stunned. There was blood under her nightgown. She was bleeding. Oh God, she really had sex with the Almighty. Chapter 11:10. She actually had sex with him when she was half awake and half drunk. Damn it. Her first time. It actually happened when she was drunk. Now that she thought about it, she didn't have a deep impression of it. Even if her ideal first time didn't happen on their wedding night, it should have happened in a romantic situation where both of them were in love with each other. Drinking a little wine, holding hands, and then it would naturally happen. She would remember it for the rest of her life. Whenever she thought about it, it would be beautiful. But not now. Now, she didn't even have a concrete impression of it. Too hateful. When she took the initiative to seduce him, he could even shout for her to stop in time. He was even better than Liu Xiaohui, which made her feel that the Almighty's self-control was very strong. But she didn't expect that he would sleep with her while she was drunk. What about now? Where is he now? Was he afraid that she would catch him and make him take responsibility and scare him away? Ning Shuima was so angry that she immediately took out the directed audio talisman that the Almighty gave her. Almighty, you're awake? Since you're awake, then wash up and accompany me to attend Ji Yunhuang's wedding. The Almighty's voice was very calm and unhurried. Where are you now? Next door. The Almighty answered simply. After sleeping with her, he ran next door to clear his relationship with her? No way. She had to get to the bottom of this. Ning Xiuma felt the anger in her heart burning even more, and her voice became colder. Almighty, why are you not at your Taoist master residence, but at my Ning residence? Shen Jili paused. This little girl was so angry when she woke up. Why? On a snowy night, I carried a drunk person back. It was very tiring. Your residence's housekeeper was very touched and felt that it was reasonable for me to stay here. I was moved by your sincerity and reluctantly decided to stay. I only let them clean the room twice. Why? Didn't you want to thank me? Thank you my ass. Taking away her chastity while she was drunk. If she didn't like him, she would have gone next door and beat him up for it. Ning Xiuma smiled. Almighty, come here. I want to thank you in person. Damn it, this kind of debt was better settled face to face. It was inconvenient to make a phone call. The Almighty came over quickly. Just as she finished speaking, her door was pushed open and the Almighty walked in. How do you want to thank me? Looking at Ning Xiuma's messy clothes, he frowned slightly. Why haven't you dressed up yet? Did you carry me home because I was drunk last night? Ning Xiuma sat down on the chair, looking like she was in court. Yes. Did you take advantage of me after we returned to this house? Not bad. The Almighty was someone who dared to take responsibility for his actions. After a pause, he added, You pulled me onto the bed, Ning Xiuma. She was the one who initiated it. She thought about it carefully and realized that she had no recollection of it. She gritted her teeth. That's because I'm drunk. Almighty, you're not drunk. If you don't want to, you can easily push me away. Damn it, why does this conversation feel so weird? Shen Jili raised his eyebrows. Why should I push you away? It's rare for you to take the initiative. Ning Xiuma, she coughed and sat up straight. She looked at him like a cat. What about the Almighty? This time, it was Shen Jili's turn to raise his eyebrows. What do you mean? He actually pretended to be confused. Ning Xiuma was unhappy and leaned forward. Didn't you say that I can't be intimate with you until I reach level 8? Give me an explanation when I reach level 8. You can't control yourself now. If it's brought forward, what about the future? Chapter 11:11. Damn it. Would it kill him to say I'll marry you? She even had to interrogate him like an interrogation. Shen Jili raised his eyebrows and looked at her. The intimacy that I'm talking about is not the intimacy that we're talking about now. You don't have to wait until you reach level 8. Ning Xiuma felt that her clever mind was confused by his words. Then what is the intimacy that you're talking about? Shen Jili paused. He felt that this girl was pretending to be confused. She obviously knew everything. But looking at Ning Xiuma's expression, it didn't seem like she was faking it. The intimacy that I'm talking about is the kind that has a physical relationship, just like what a husband and wife do. Shen Jili never thought that he would be able to share this knowledge with her one day. Ning Xiuma was angry. Don't we already have a physical relationship? You already took my virginity last night. Shen Jili was speechless. He obviously didn't take the last step. Okay. She almost got internal injuries from holding it in. He looked at her from head to toe and then said, Come, stand up and walk a few steps. Ning Xiuma didn't know what he was up to, but she wasn't afraid of him playing any tricks. She stood up and walked back and forth a few times. Then, she stepped on the chair next to the Almighty and leaned over to look at him. So what if I walk a few steps? Shen Jili looked at her imposing posture again and said slowly, If I really did something to you last night, do you think you would still be able to get out of bed today? Do you think you can still walk as if nothing happened? Ning Xiuma was speechless. Did the Almighty mean that he didn't really have sex with her? Then why did she feel that her waist was sore, her stomach was hurting, and even her lower body? Just as she thought of this, she felt a gush of blood coming out from her lower body. Her new underwear was quickly dyed red. Ning Xiuma froze. This feeling was similar to the feeling of having her period. Shen Jili also glanced at her bloodstained skirt. Menstruation? Ning Xiuma's pretty face finally turned red. Damn, her period, of all times, it just had to come at this time. It caused her to misunderstand the Almighty, causing her to make such a blunder. Before Shen Jili stepped out of the door, he patted her on the shoulder and said, Congratulations, you've finally become a young girl. Then he slowly walked out. Ning Xiuma, what did he say? Was she not a young girl before? He wouldn't keep treating her like a little girl, would he? Ning Xiuma was a little suspicious. So I still have my chastity. I haven't lost my first time. Ning Xiuma heaved a sigh of relief, but for some reason, she felt a little disappointed. Looking at the marks on her body, the Almighty must have taken advantage of her crazily last night, but he was still able to stop in time and not take the last step. The Almighty's self-control was indeed not for show. Ning Xiuma thought that Ji Yinhuang and Tian Xueqing's wedding wouldn't be too smooth and that there would be some small accidents. She didn't expect that the wedding would be perfect from the beginning to the end. The red wedding hall was decorated beautifully, and the guests were bustling with activity. The sound of firecrackers was deafening, and the wedding procession was draped in red decorations along the long street. Everything was the same as the crown prince marrying the crown princess. There was no deviation at all. Even Ji Yinhuang didn't have the evil aura from last night. He was wearing the crown prince's red wedding outfit. Although he wasn't beaming, there was nothing wrong with it. Chapter 11-12. When the music stopped, Ji Yinhuang reached his hand into the sedan and allowed Tian Xueqing, who was wearing a red veil, to help him out. He could feel that her palm was slightly sweaty. Her hand was warm and smooth. He helped her out of the sedan and transmitted his voice to her. "You finally got what you wanted, my crown princess." The small hand on the back of his hand slightly stiffened. Her palm was slightly cold. She transmitted her voice back. "Thank you, Your Highness." Her voice was cold and did not have any warmth. Ji Yinhuang felt an indescribable anger and transmitted his voice again. "Other than this title, I will not give you anything else." The small hand on the back of his hand stiffened. Her voice was still very faint when she transmitted her voice. "Whatever." Ji Yinhuang was speechless. He felt as if he had punched the air, and there was nothing left for him to do. His other hand, which was hidden in his sleeve, secretly clenched and sneered in his heart. A crown princess who did not receive any love from her husband would not have a good life in the crown prince residence, even if she had the title. He would let her know the price of blindly coveting the position of crown princess. Amidst the sound of firecrackers and music, he led her step by step down the red carpet and into the main hall. Under the gaze of tens of thousands of people, they bowed to heaven and earth. When the last words of husband and wife bow to each other were said, the bride and groom bowed to each other, and the ceremony was finally completed. Not only did Lihin Ti breathe a sigh of relief, even Ning Xiuma, who was sitting at the head of the table with Shun Juli, also breathed a sigh of relief. However, her heart still felt heavy. Although the two of them were married, their future was still unknown. Could Tian Xueqing move Ji Yinhuang? Could she obtain the happiness she wanted? Ning Xiuma's gaze turned and saw Shui Mo's figure among the guests. She looked at the pair of newlyweds who were about to enter the wedding room and was somewhat lost in thought. The young girl's big eyes were filled with envy. She must be envious of the grandeur of this wedding. Ning Xiuma secretly sighed. What was the use of a wedding without love? It was just a show for the parents of both sides. No matter how grand the wedding is, it can't hide the heartless paleness. Tian Xueqing, I hope you can find happiness. The wedding ended perfectly. Shun Juli did not attend the banquet that followed. Instead, he left with Ning Xiuma. What are you thinking about? Shun Juli asked Ning Xiuma, who seemed to be lost in thought. White clouds floated in the sky, while white snow covered the ground. Heaven and earth were one color, and the scenery was quite interesting. Ning Xiuma sat on Shun Juli's cloud. She looked down at the scenery below and seemed to have thought of something. I hope that Tian Xueqing and Ji Yinhuang's ending won't be the same as Yi Feng's. Shun Juli didn't say anything. He just stroked her hair, smoothing out her messy hair like satin. Guru, aren't you good at fortune-telling? What was the ending of Ji Yinhuang and Tian Xueqing? Ning Xiuma looked at him with bright eyes. Shun Juli's fingers that were stroking her hair paused. He only said one sentence. Heaven's secrets cannot be revealed. TSK. He's keeping me in suspense again. I don't want to know their specific fate. I only want to know if their ending will be a comedy or a tragedy. Guru, You didn't say 2 words, so it's not considered revealing heaven's secrets, right? Whether it's a comedy or a tragedy depends on them. The guru said a few words, but none of them were the answer that Ning Shuima wanted. Guru, can't you tell? Ning Shuima didn't give up trying to provoke him. To me, provocation is useless. The guru remained calm and unfathomable. Chapter 11:13. Ning Shuima shook her head. That's not right. I heard that there's no one in this world that great God can't see through unless you've already changed their fate and changed their fate. Only then will their fate be in their own hands, and no one else can see it. But great God shouldn't have changed the fate of these 2 people, so there's no reason why you can't see it. Sean Julie's expression changed slightly, but he didn't say anything. This little girl was too smart. Other people could draw inferences from 1 case, but she could draw inferences from 6, the fate of those 2. He had already adjusted it a long, long time ago. Ji Yanhuang was the reincarnation of his most prized 5th disciple, Tian Xiao Shu, while Tian Xueqing's name was Ling Zai in her previous life. Tian Xiao Shu was a prince, while Ling Zai was an assassin sent by his enemy country. Ling Zai came to Tian Xiao Shu's side as a spy, but fell in love with him by accident and did everything for him. Tian Xiao Shu secretly found out about her identity, but he didn't believe her. He only pretended to deal with her and even used her as a traitor, causing her to be hunted down by her own country. At the most critical moment, Tian Xiao Shu saved his sister and then watched as Ling Zai was shot to death by the pursuers. Tian Xiao Shu always thought that Ling Zai didn't love him. It was only at the moment of her death that he realized he was wrong. He searched for Ling Zai's soul like a madman and begged the ancestor. The ancestor didn't want to change Tian Xiao Shu's fate, so Tian Xiao Shu left in despair. He didn't know where he heard that the ginseng baby had the ability to bring the dead back to life. So he traveled thousands of miles to find this fruit tree. In the end, he died silently in the stomach of the stone spirit. After Tian Xiao Shu died, Shan Juli was sad that his prized disciple had died early. He also felt that it wasn't good for his disciple to die with such regrets, so he wanted the 2 of them to have a perfect life. So when he recognized that Tian Xueqing was Ling Zai's reincarnation, he immediately used some means to give her to Ji Yanhuang. Tian Xueqing's meeting with Ji Yanhuang when she was young was also secretly arranged by him. According to the original fate, Tian Xueqing and Ji Yanhuang wouldn't cross paths in this life, so there wouldn't be any fate between them. Ji Yanhuang would sit on top of the world, but spend the rest of his life alone. As for Tian Xueqing, she would be treated as a pawn by her father and given to the sect master to be his second wife. She would live an ordinary life, emotionless and without desires until death. Now, because of his intervention, Tian Xueqing and Ji Yanhuang finally got together and filled up the imperfections of his previous life. He only hoped that Ji Yanhuang would cherish this hard-won fate and not miss it with Tian Xueqing. Defying the heavens and changing one's fate was a technique that defied the heavens. It could not be told to anyone, let alone to the person involved. Of course, he couldn't see how they would develop in the future. He couldn't tell Ning Shuima all of this, and he didn't want to let Ning Shuima keep guessing. So he pulled her up. How's your fog condensing technique going? Show me one. Tester. Ning Shuima's eyes immediately lit up. I've succeeded. Her fingers repeatedly moved in the air, and a moment later, a small cloud of mist was summoned to her. How is it? Ning Shuima was waiting for the Almighty's affirmation. It's just passable. The Almighty didn't hold back and said, with this kind of mist, not to mention carrying you in the future, even if it carried an ant, it would still pass through. Continue to cultivate. With a wave of his sleeve, the small cloud of mist floating on Ning Shuima's fingertips disappeared without a trace. Ning Shuima was speechless. Chapter 11:14. She didn't say anything and just focused on her training, completely forgetting about Ji Yanhuang and the others. Shen Jili successfully changed the topic. He glanced down at the capital city that was far away. Ji Yanhuang, I hope you can grasp your own happiness. Master can only help you up to this point. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, half a year had passed. Half a year's time wasn't too long, but it wasn't too short either. The structure of the 5 countries on this continent didn't change much. To others, this half a year might just be the change of the sun and the moon, but to Ning Xuema, it was half a year of rapid progress. Her psychokinesis had reached Earth rank level 6 and was on its way to level 7. When she reached Earth rank level 6.5, Shunjili told her that she could practice the Imperial Sword technique. She could finally fly by herself. Maybe it was because she had fallen from the sky too many times that it left a shadow in her heart. She had a good grasp of the Imperial Sword technique, but she didn't dare to practice it herself. Day after day passed, and unknowingly, a month had passed. Moreover, it seemed like it would continue to drag on indefinitely. In this half a year, the great god didn't just teach her in one place, but brought her to travel all over the world, thousands of mountains and rivers. Not only did her psychokinesis grow like a sesame seed, but she also gained a lot of knowledge and experience. Her horizons were also very broad. She finally knew that this continent was just a place for Shunjili to stay. There were still many places he could go. For example, there was the Ageless Country, the Dwarf Country, the Giant Country, and so on. Qian Pavilion was a pavilion in the sky. The sunrise here was the most spectacular, and it was a great scenery. Shunjili and Ning Xuema flew into the pavilion hand in hand. She had been to many beautiful places. The cold moonlight on Mount Yuehua, the blossoming peach blossoms in Luxian Park, the clouds and mist in Chongkong Country, the tall cliffs, and the slowly flowing river of stars on the astrology platform. But there was no place that could compare to this place. It was so beautiful that it was suffocating. The sun slowly rose from the churning sea of clouds, radiating golden light in all directions. The layers of clouds were dyed by the golden light layer by layer, and gradually they were plated with a divine aura. The Kirin happily played with the Luan birds that were dancing in the sun. Every scale on its body shone brightly under the sunlight, making it look like a golden Kirin. The red-crowned crane danced around the pavilion, its figure graceful and graceful. Specks of light sprinkled down, making it look like a dream. There seemed to be a faint singing voice coming from far away. The heavenly wind blew, and celestial music drifted in the air. It was truly a paradise on earth. Ning Xuema and Shunjili stood side by side, hand in hand, enjoying the prosperity of the mortal world. There was a faint, cold fragrance in the air, like a wisp of cold plum fragrance in the midst of the heavy snow, making one feel relaxed and happy. It was the unique scent of the Almighty. Ning Xuema looked at the Luan birds dancing in the distance and couldn't help but sigh. Almighty, this place is really beautiful. How did you find this pavilion in the sky? Shunjili held her waist and smiled faintly. Xuema, do you like this place? His smile was like a lotus flower in the misty rain, light and elegant. Even though Ning Xuema had been with the Almighty for so long, she was still often swayed by his smile. Ning Xuema nodded and smiled as she snuggled into his embrace. She raised her head, and her large eyes were as bright as the stars in the sky. She replied without hesitation, I like it. I like it very much. Chapter 11:15. Shunjili lowered his head to look at the girl in his arms. Her face was flushed with excitement. His eyes lit up and his lips curled into a smile. He coaxed, It's good that you like it. Come, Xuema, close your eyes. Ning Xuema's heart couldn't help but beat wildly. The Almighty suddenly brought her to such a beautiful place to enjoy the sunrise together. Then he looked at her affectionately and asked her to close her eyes. Could it be the Almighty was going to propose to her? Ning Xuema felt that her heart was about to jump out of her chest. Looking at Shunjili's half-smile, she suddenly felt that the Almighty's smile was so devilish and seductive. She slowly closed her eyes. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly due to uneasiness. It was as if a black butterfly was fluttering up and down. Was the Almighty going to confess? Was he finally going to confess and marry her? Should she agree immediately or proudly say that she would think about it? If she agreed immediately, it would seem too unreserved. Moreover, the Almighty had made her wait for so long. She should be a little proud for once. Should she say that she would think about it? But she really wanted to agree immediately. Ning Xiuma's heart was in a dilemma. Suddenly, she felt something soft on her lips. A faint fragrance wafted into her face. Ning Xiuma was immersed in this kiss while her heart was in a dilemma. He kissed her. Next, he was going to propose. He was going to propose. Should she agree or not? After the kiss, Ning Xiuma's long eyelashes trembled slightly again. Her face seemed to be redder than before. Before she could figure out what to do, she suddenly felt her body become light. Before she could react, her body flew out of Qianyan Pavilion like a cannonball. The clouds in the sky came and went quickly. In the wind, Shan Jili's faint voice sounded, "Go, Xiuma. This is a good place to practice flying." Although the wind was strong, Shan Jili's voice was clear as if it was right next to her ear. It wasn't hard to hear the faint smile in his voice. "Shinjili, you bastard!" Ning Xiuma's exasperated voice echoed in the wind. "Go, Xiuma. Do you think you're throwing a poke ball? You bastard." After seeing the beautiful scenery and kissing, shouldn't it be begging? Marriage? Really? Why did things change so abruptly when it came to her? Almighty, where did all your romantic cells go? If it was any other girl, she would have already been toyed to death. Ning Xiuma complained as she channeled her psychokinesis. At the same time, she silently summoned her sword. A pair of shining email piercers suddenly appeared under her feet, gently supporting her. Ning Xiuma was immediately embarrassed when she saw them. Because of this distraction, the flow of her psychokinesis paused for a moment. Her body swayed, and she almost fell again. Other people were all sage-like when they flew on their swords. Why was it so funny when it came to him? Was there an immortal who could fly on two swords? It wasn't like she was skating. The email piercers came in a pair. When she summoned them, she naturally summoned a pair. She just happened to be stepping on one with each foot. In addition, it was her first time flying on a sword, so she wasn't very stable. She jumped up and down, so she looked like a crab running amok in the sky. It looked quite funny. Stepping on two swords was a lot more stable, but if there was a strong wind, she would definitely have to perform a split in the air. Ning Xiuma was speechless. She recited a spell and put away one of the email piercers. Then, she shifted her weight to the other one. Chapter 11:16. The email piercer shook violently, as if it was dissatisfied that its other half was missing. It almost threw Ning Xiuma off. Ning Xiuma cursed in a low voice after she steadied herself. The sword had become a spirit and was throwing a tantrum with her. Damn it! She tried to stabilize the email piercer and slowly try to fly with only the sword. At first, she flew in all directions and almost fell off several times. Fortunately, she reacted quickly, so she was able to escape danger every time. Time flew by quickly amidst this thrilling experience. After a while, Ning Xiuma was finally able to fly in a straight line. Her figure was also able to stand steadily on top of it. She looked like she was in the right situation. Ning Xiuma gave herself a thumbs up in her heart. She really was a rarely seen, peerless genius in this world. Flying on a sword was such a difficult task, yet she was able to grasp it so quickly. Looking at the trajectory behind her, it was such a beautiful straight line. There was not a single bend. It was as straight as a plane. Moreover, the thickness of the clouds was uniform, just like a straight cloud road. Ning Xiuma was flying around proudly. Suddenly, a person appeared in front of her. She suddenly braked and almost flipped over. She stopped just before the tip of her sword touched the person. She steadied herself and looked up to see the person in front of her. She suddenly became angry. "Shun Julie, do you want to die?" Shun Julie looked at her quietly, with a faint smile on his face. Only then did Ning Xiuma react. Her little bit of martial arts couldn't harm a single hair on the great god's head. She suddenly remembered the scene when Shun Julie threw her down. It was like throwing a Pikachu. When she was about to get angry, she suddenly heard Shun Julie's smiling voice, "Shuima, you can't fly wrong." Ning Shuima was immediately proud. She controlled the Immerse piercer to fly around him a few times. She could not hide her pride. "Of course, I'm a genius. You found a treasure." The smile on Shun Julie's face deepened when he saw that she was like a proud little lion. He suddenly stood behind her and whispered in her ear, "Little genius, take me for a spin." His breath was right next to her ear, and his lips gently touched her earlobe when he spoke. Ning Shuima's earlobes were very sensitive. Basically, they couldn't be touched, not to mention being touched by the lips of the person she loved. Ning Shuima was so agitated that she almost couldn't catch her breath. Furthermore, Shun Julie was standing on top of her with his real body. He didn't use any qin gong at all. Because of the sudden addition of a person's weight, the Immerse piercer suddenly sank downwards. In an instant, they had fallen several hundred meters vertically. Ning Shuima, her heart almost jumped out her throat. Damn it, she hadn't even activated the ability to carry people. She controlled the Immerse piercer in a flurry. The Immerse piercer flew up and down randomly. Ning Shuima was almost flipped over. It was more exciting than riding a roller coaster. Shun Julie stood behind her calmly, as if it had nothing to do with him. He quietly stood there, weighing the scales. Ning Shuima almost wanted to kick him down. When did the Almighty become so bad? She tried to stabilize the Immerse piercer that was jumping up and down while complaining, "Almighty, why are you so heavy? Shouldn't you go on a diet?" Shun Julie, this little girl, actually complained that he was heavy. He hadn't even officially pressed her down. Shun Julie's eyes darkened and his eyelashes drooped. He seemed to be seriously considering how to punish this little girl who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Ning Shuima suddenly felt a chill down her spine. She had a feeling that she was being schemed against. Chapter 11:17. Before she could finish this thought, a big blue head suddenly appeared in front of her. Little Apple's eyes widened, and he said in surprise, "Master, you can fly too?" Ning Shuima secretly comforted her frightened little heart and nodded. She patted Little Apple's big head and said, "Of course, don't you know who your master is?" Little Apple became even more cheerful. He flew a few rounds around Ning Shuima and shouted excitedly, "Master, you're great. It's your first time flying, and you're so stable and fast." Ning Shuima couldn't hide her pride and said, "Of course, Little Apple. Look, I'm also flying very steadily with the Almighty on my back." After saying that, she flew a few rounds with the Almighty on her back. She flew in a circle, and the circle she flew out was even more accurate than a compass. Little Apple's eyes were full of stars. "Master, you're great." Ning Shuima looked at Little Apple's admiring eyes and felt even better. She raised her eyebrows proudly. With this skill, she wouldn't be afraid of falling off a cliff anymore. No matter how high she fell, it didn't matter to her. She could fly over mountains, plains, and oceans on her sword. She couldn't hide the smile in her eyes when she thought of this. She was already one step closer to the golden path of being awesome. "Master, Kiran's voice sounded again. Ning Shuima lowered her head and saw Little Apple's bashful expression. He seemed to want to say something, but found it hard to open his mouth. Kiran had always been tough and careless. When did he learn to be shy? Ning Shuima patted Kiran's big head and said, "Little Apple, say what you want to say. When did you become as bashful as a female, Kiran?" Little Apple raised his big head and looked at her with eyes full of hope. "Master, can you carry Little Apple and fly back?" Ning Shuima looked at the fat and strong Kiran in front of her. He was dozens of feet tall and weighed a few tons. The corner of her mouth twitched. "No, Little Apple, you can't." Little Apple continued to plead. He hugged Ning Shuima's calf with his front legs and almost pulled her down. "Master, I beg you." Ning Shuima was speechless. No, I think." Shun Julie raised his hand slightly and flicked Little Apple away. Little Apple was instantly sent flying. After a while, he ran back, feeling wronged. Looking at the enlarged Ame piercer under Ning Xiuma's feet, it steeled its heart and stood up abruptly. At the same time, it said pitifully, "Master, please fly Little Apple back. Today is Little Apple's birthday." The moment Little Apple stepped on the Ame piercer, it was like a plane being stepped on by a giant. It suddenly fell down in a parabola. Ning Xiuma's heart almost stopped when she descended 2,000 meters in just a few seconds. She was about to go crazy. No matter how much of a genius she was, it was impossible for her to carry a mythological beast that weighed several tons to fly. She was about to kiss the earth. She really wanted to kick Kirin down, but controlling the Ame piercer had already taken up all her energy. She didn't have the time to kick it. Guru, hurry up and do something. If you don't do something, we'll fall to our deaths. Ning Xiuma could only ask the guru for help. I'm too heavy. Suddenly, Shun Juli's words came from the sky. He still stood behind Ning Xiuma with an indifferent look, quietly hugging her slender waist. Ning Xiuma didn't react for a moment. When she did, she immediately felt sad and angry. Why was the guru so petty? Chapter 11:18. Master, you're descending too fast. This won't do. Pull me up, pull me up. Kirin felt that its master's heart was too strong. Even it didn't dare to try descending at such a fast speed. As expected, its master was the best. Kirin gave its master a thumbs up in its heart, seeing that they were still a few hundred meters away from the ground, and then looking at the huge Kirin squatting in front of her. Ning Xiuma finally couldn't help but explode in the wind. Little Apple, you stupid Kirin, get down. Her sudden outburst gave Little Apple a fright. Little Apple shook its scales that stood up from the fright and flew away unwillingly. It even asked, "Master, did you specially bring Little Apple to make a drop tower?" Ning Xiuma had casually mentioned the drop tower when she was chatting with it. She didn't expect it to remember it. Ning Xiuma's reply was to kick its chillin' buttocks. Ow! Little Apple howled and hurriedly flew away. Ning Xiuma steadied herself when she was about 300 meters away from the ground. It was only now that she had the time to look at the scenery around her. Suddenly, she was stunned. The whistling cold wind, the vast snowfield, and the faint figure of the sun on the distant horizon. This place was the ice field. She had come here with a group of people half a year ago. It was polar night then, but now it was polar day. The ice and snow were still there, but the people were no longer there. She exhaled softly and slowly controlled the sword to get close to the ground. Then she jumped off. She stood in the same place. When she saw the scenery around her clearly, her eyes dimmed slightly. In front of her was a vast snowfield. At a glance, it was boundless. Here, the wind and snow were still there, but it had already covered the traces of the past. Not far away was a cliff. Below the cliff was a vast sea. Ning Xiuma walked up the cliff quietly. Her expression was indifferent, and her gaze was distant, as if she was reminiscing about something. Ning Xiuma would never forget the scene of Yan Ziyuan jumping off the cliff with Yifeng in her arms. Those people, those things, those once vibrant scenes might have faded long ago, but they had always been in her heart. They had become a thorn in her heart, a needle that would jump out from time to time and stab her. Shun Julie gently held her waist and stood side by side with her on the edge of the cliff. Ning Xiuma nestled in Shun Julie's arms, her eyes still staring into the distance. She softly asked, "Great God, do you think they are together?" Shun Julie tidied her slightly messy hair and said indifferently, "Perhaps." Ning Xiuma was silent for a long time. After a long time, she stretched out her hand and a green light flickered on her fingertips. In the center of the green light, a small white flower bud gradually bloomed. It bloomed layer by layer in a complicated manner. Kirin curiously came up to her. "Master, what flower is this?" "It's so beautiful." Ning Xiuma looked at the sacred and beautiful flower in her hand and said indifferently, "Red spider lily, a flower that leads the way for souls." She continued to bloom a few more red spider lilies in her hand and threw them down together. A few white flowers floated on the blue sea, sending them far away. Until the flowers completely disappeared, she and the great god turned to leave. Great god, I want to take a look at the bottom of the cave again. Shun Julie readily agreed. Okay. The two of them walked down the tunnel. Ning Shuama did not speak along the way, but the image of Yin Ziyuan stumbling while carrying Yi Feng flashed past her eyes. It had only been half a year, but now it felt like a lifetime. Chapter 1119. What was love in the world? It made people pledge their lives to each other. If Gu Ziyan had not cast the twin life curse on Yin Ziyuan, none of this would have happened. Perhaps Yin Ziyuan and Yi Feng would have lived happily together. At that time, she only cared about Yin Ziyuan and forgot about Gu Ziyan. She did not know what happened to that bastard. The crystals in the cave were still strange. From afar, Ning Shuama saw a human-shaped object lying in front of her. She walked closer to take a look, and her heart skipped a beat. It was a corpse that was shriveled to the extreme, like a mummy that was all skin and bones, and its body was still wrapped in the dark and tattered fur of a white wolf. It lay there on its stomach, and it was so thin that its original appearance could no longer be seen clearly. Only the jade thumb ring he held tightly in his hand revealed his true identity. Gu Ziyan. It turned out that he did not escape, but died here. Ning Shuama lowered her head and glanced at the corpse. It looked like he had starved to death. Ning Shuama sighed. Serves him right. This bastard deserved to end up like this. Strange. She remembered that her acupoint sealing technique could only immobilize a person for 4 hours. If this bastard's acupoints were unsealed, why didn't he escape? Why did he starve to death without moving? She suddenly thought of something and glanced at the Almighty beside her. Did you do this? Shun Julie answered faintly. I just didn't want him to follow me. Well, the Almighty did well. The knot in Ning Shuama's heart finally melted a little. She and Shun Julie walked around the cave again. No one would come here for a few years. It was as if everything had happened yesterday. She held Shun Julie's hand and wandered around aimlessly. Shun Julie looked down at her and sighed in his heart. Shuama still had not walked out of the tragedy of Yin Ziyuan and Yi Feng. The greatest taboo for cultivators was to be too stubborn. Once they were too stubborn, they would most likely form inner demons. Shun Julie suddenly said in an indifferent tone, sometimes the ending you see with your eyes is not the final ending. Ning Shuama was sensitive enough to smell the hidden meaning in his words. She looked up, grabbed his sleeve, and asked, Great Master, do you know something? Shun Julie looked at her with amusement. He patted her head and said, What do you know? I only said a sentence of Zen mantra. This little girl was indeed exceptionally intelligent. It was a pity that he could not tell her what happened to those two people. Ning Shuama, however, after hearing what the Almighty said, the heaviness in her chest dissipated. Perhaps Yin Yuan and Yi Feng had already reincarnated and were now happily together. She turned around and hugged the Almighty's arm. Finally, a smile appeared on her face. Great Master, you're right. Perhaps what you see now is not the final ending. Shun Julie ruffled her hair. You're a promising child. Ning Shuama smiled. Of course, I'm a peerless genius. She was interrupted by the great god. Ning Shuama's depression dissipated by half, and she became lively again. She held Shun Julie's sleeve and looked up with a smile. Great Master, I'm still missing the last ingredient for the Golden Sky Pill. It happened to be on this ice field. Since I accidentally came here, let's go get it. Shun Julie patted her head. As you wish. Shun Julie's words warmed Ning Shuama's heart. The feeling of being held in the palm of someone's hand was really wonderful. She tiptoed and kissed Shun Julie. Her eyes sparkled as she said, Great Master, you're the best. Moi. Chapter 1120. Shun Julie pulled her into his embrace, lowered his head, and deepened the kiss. After a while, he let go of her, who was gasping for breath. Seeing her flushed face, he couldn't help but kiss her lightly on the lips. Then he said calmly, Moi. We can want more in the future. Ning Shuama was speechless. The two of them left the cave and came to the ice field again. They walked forward leisurely. The wind whistled and the snowflakes fell, but the two of them were not affected at all. Ning Shuama silently chanted an incantation and set up another barrier outside the one set by the great god. She smiled and said, "Great god, you can remove the barrier. Let me protect you this time." Shunjili looked at her with a slight smile. With a flick of his finger, the transparent barrier immediately disappeared. Ning Shuama's barrier was set up quite well. It blocked most of the wind. When the wind reached the two of them, it instantly turned into little sheep, leaving only a gentle breeze. Ning Shuama looked at Shunjili proudly. Just as she was about to say something, she suddenly paused. She focused her attention and listened carefully. There seemed to be the sound of fighting in the distance. There were actually people in such a desolate place. She closed her eyes and listened carefully for a while. Then, she raised her eyebrows. There were not only two people, but they seemed to be fighting very fiercely. She had always been an onlooker. At this time, her curiosity was successfully piqued. She tugged on Shunjili's sleeve and said, "Great God, let's go and take a look." Shunjili had actually heard a long time ago. He didn't say anything because he was too lazy to meddle in other people's business. However, since Ning Shuama requested it, it didn't matter if he went. The two of them finally stopped strolling around and began to walk forward. The closer they got to the place, the more intense the fight was. In the distance, a huge white beast was fighting with a person. Not far behind that person, there were two figures, one big and one small. Ning Shuama's footsteps suddenly stopped. She immediately recognized the three people. The one fighting with the beast was Ji Yinhuang. Behind him was Tian Xueqing and Shui Mo. A man and two women were walking together. What were the three of them doing here? Why was he fighting with the number one overlord of the snowfield, the Snow Flood Dragon? Because of Ning Shuama's kick on the butt, the little Chilin's mood was a bit low. Its tail drooped as it dejectedly followed behind the two people. Seeing the two people in front of it stop, it suspiciously raised its head and saw the huge monster's silhouette in the distance. It excitedly raised its tail. "Master, this is the white monster that chased us last time. Master, let me go. I want to kill it. Last time, it chased me around like a pig and a wolf. This time, Little Apple is going to avenge itself." Ning Shuama patted Little Apple's head, signaling it to calm down. Little Apple suppressed its desire to charge forward, but its beastly eyes were still staring at the monster in the distance. Its forelimbs were slightly arched, as if it was going to shoot over in the next second. Little Apple seemed to have suddenly discovered something. Its tail was no longer as straight as an antenna. After a while, it suddenly slapped its big head. I was wondering what was wrong. Why is this one so big? I haven't seen it for half a year, and it actually grew a few rounds. What did it eat? It's so fat. Little Apple was right. This one is really too big. It was almost the size of 4 Kirin. Its huge body was indomitable. Ji Yinhuang and the rest were like insignificant ants in front of it. Shunjili's gaze landed on the monster. He said indifferently, "This is the Snow Flood Dragon King. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.